being Emeritus College and all of that. So it was great for them checking that out. But right now, we're going to check out some of the interview that we had with Van Dorn and Hennett. And definitely, I think that y'all will find this very enjoyable and a very enlightening and interesting conversation. So I'm hoping that y'all will enjoy the interview that was done with Van Dorn Hennett and that y'all can learn a lot about the arts. And like I said, you may hear some references to nighttime because the interview was actually done in the nighttime. But hopefully, y'all will check it out and enjoy what is going on. But right now, let's check out this interview with Van Dorn Hennett. It's evening time here in Durham, North Carolina, and we're going to do a special edition of the radio show with Mark Lee on IBM TV, but also a great conversation with none other than Van Dorn Hennett, who is actually a longtime family friend. And I remember that my mom has got a number of his pieces hanging in her house, still hanging there, and very much something that I see every time that I go visit her over there in Rocky Mount. And a number of other friends of mine are also very much fans of his as well. So always been fascinated by the work he does and how it's connected to everything from religion and philosophy on down to the geometric shapes and all of that. So I know that anytime I go home, that's one of the things that I see when I go visit Miss Valeria Lee, is seeing some of the great work of Van Dorn Hennett and all of that. So looking forward to having a great conversation with him and learning more about some of the things that he's got going on and about this fantastic artwork that he's been doing for decades and has definitely done a great job of. So I'm looking forward to a very powerful conversation with a longtime friend and a longtime family friend. So without any further ado, let's bring Van Dorn Hennett into the conversation. So how are you doing, Van Dorn? So glad to see you. So glad that you're able to have this conversation. I know that me and you and Calvin have been talking about it for a while. And like I was just telling some of our listening audiences, every time that I think of your artwork, I think of the fact that it's hanging up at mom's house, because anytime that I go home, it's right there in the living room and a number of other places in her home. So I know she's got a couple of the geometric pieces and then a couple of other more traditional kind of artwork as well. But definitely, I've always see that artwork whenever I go visit mom in Rocky Mountain. I know she's a big fan of yours, as is several other members of my family as well.
Yes. Well, I'm happy that she has that work. She has work that spans quite the length of time: geometric abstractions, organic abstractions, a little bit of everything that I've done in my history. Yeah. Wow. Well, Mark, thank you for inviting me on the show. I'm happy to be here. So let's rock and roll. Let's talk about the geometry. Let's talk about metaphysics, maybe a little bit of physics on the side, some other subjects like consciousness. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Definitely want to talk about all of that. That's one of the things I've always been curious about is, what do you think got you into the whole concept of using geometry as part of your artwork? Because like I said, whenever I think of you, that's the first thing that comes to my mind is the geometric aspects. And a lot of times that's very much of a scientific art aspect. And I know that even my dad, Jim Lee, uses some science in his artwork as well. So I know that there are a number of artists that use science as part of their artwork, but you are one of the premier folks that use math as part of your art and definitely geometry. So I was just wondering, when did you even get this idea in your head that that's what you wanted to do?
What's fascinating about my journey is that before 1989, when I met Robert Lee Powell Sr., I was already working with geometry. I had begun working with it after I reintroduced the line into my work in, I think it was 1986, might have been 1986. I had painted with sponges for like 8 years prior to that. And all of my paintings looked like atmospheres. And so I had done this no line in my compositions for like 8 years. And then all of a sudden in 1986, I believe I started reintroducing lines into my work. Then the next thing I know, I'm doing organic abstractions, but they're still geometric. They turn out to be geometric. And then I meet Powell, and Powell's involved with something called sacred geometry. So I started studying under him. The next thing I know, all of my work is becoming regular, symmetrical, two-fold symmetry, three-fold symmetry, four-fold symmetry, on up to 12. So that's what happened. I became hooked. It's like you get introduced to something and it's the nicest tasting piece of pie that you've ever had, and you just keep going back for more. Yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, and what drew you into artwork just in general? Because like I said, as long as I've known you, you've always been an artist. But I don't know whether you were an artist as a kid or whether it was something that developed as a adult. Because I do know that there have been a number of artists here in our triangle community that have become artists late in life. But then there are some that it was a natural gift from almost like from birth or at least their teen years. But I don't know enough of your backstory to know whether it's something that happened early or something that happened later.
It happened early. I was actually attempting to make artwork when I was 5 years old. In other words, I was looking for an instrument to make marks with because I was trying to record ideas at that early age. Now, a lot of people that know me know that I have this funny story about being born with memory. So I came in the world ready to rock and roll, and as soon as I could start making marks on surfaces, I was going. I was at it. I was in the first grade. Well, no, let's just say fifth grade, fourth grade, fifth grade at school, and teachers had me doing bulletin boards. I was competing with some of my childhood friends in grade school who could draw the best comic book characters. So I had it going on, and I'm one of the few people that actually kept going with it. And so it's been my life's journey. I've never been willing to put the pencil down, and I've never been willing to turn my back on this. I can't even call it a life calling. I'll simply call it a mission, like an assignment. So now I talk about this as actually being my life's assignment, not so much a mission, but well, yeah, mission, assignment, same thing.
Yeah, because I know one of the things that I've oftentimes talked about on this platform and everything with a number of folks that fall in the artist realm is even trying to define what is an artist to them. And I'd love to hear Van Jordan Henne's definition of what art means to him and what it means to be an artist. Because, like I said, I've talked to musicians, I've talked to comedians, I've talked to filmmakers, and they all have different meanings of what it means to be an artist to them. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about what it means to be an artist.
Well, my definition takes us back to the word artifact and also back to what the shaman was doing in ancient cultures, where the shaman was serving as a medicine man, providing any type of medicine that could be provided to the people that would help them to reconfigure themselves and to, I guess you might say, return to a state of balance and equilibrium. So my concept of what an artist is at best is someone who brings something to the equation, brings something to the table that is helping to establish balance and equilibrium in the individual's life that is having this experience with whatever the artist or shaman is presenting. So I think of myself as actually more of a shaman-like individual than what we conveniently think of today as an artist. Today, artists are people who make any and everything. I'm quite deliberate, quite intentional in regards to what I'm making. So I'm making artifacts that are, in my mind and in my heart, designed to assist people in establishing more balance and equilibrium in their lives, whether that's at a psychological level, an emotional level, and even physiological. I have a perfect example. There's a person who works in the healing arts that lives in our area who
Mhm.
saw one of my images one year on her computer screen and told me that she had a spontaneous healing in her left shoulder. Now, these kinds of things have happened along the way, not just with me, but with other individuals. So if we can create something that can trigger a person's memory and help to establish in their subconscious mind a link to something that we would call a holistic state, then that holistic state can manifest in the body, and we can say that a healing can occur. Now, this brings to mind someone named Stephen Halpern. The government came after him, told him, hey, buddy, you can't use this language associated with your music. He was talking about healing and providing music that was going to be instrumental in helping individuals reestablish a sense of balance and equilibrium. So he had to back down, change all of his labeling and what have you. I have the good fortune of not having had any government official come at me with the conversation, hey, mister, you can't use the word healing in regards to what you do. So I say it, I don't worry about it. If anybody does come knocking at my door, I'll invite them to find someone else to harass, you know. Oh
That
boy.
makes a lot of sense. And speaking of harassing and everything, I know another thing that I've talked to a number of folks about the role of artists as activists and as agents of change. And I know that you've actually talked about artists as agents of change. I would actually add to that the role of artists as activists as well. So, how important do you think it is for artists to be activists or agents of change? Because you don't always have to be an activist to be an agent of change, and vice versa.
But what's funny about this question is each one of us in every act is a matter of having an influence upon someone somewhere. So when we become conscious of our actions as being a causative force, then we can answer the question, well, what is right action? How is my action being applied to the plight of humankind? So in my experience, this has been one of the backdrops to my journey for many, many years, maybe decades, asking the question, how do I apply myself in such a way that my aesthetic sensibilities translates into benefiting someone else? So that is an act of activism. And in fact, I'm glad you brought that question to us because activism is something that doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a banner, you don't have to have uh, a platform from which to be an activist. You can be simply doing good in the world, and you are an activist. So it's what unfolds out of the heart that manifests through our hands and then the actions that we place into the world. This is all activism. So I think of all of us as being activists. Now we are activists for one thing or another, and when we're dealing with duality, we're dealing with polarity. So you're either affecting change for the better or affecting change for the worse. So that's activism in the negative and activism in the positive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely agree with you on that. One of the other things that I know you talked about in your artwork, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well, is how art ties into worship. And it seems to me that in a lot of ways that you're doing the artwork is almost your own form of worship, your own form of like even having your connection to the most high or whatever folks want to call that God force and everything. But
Yeah,
definitely it seems to me like you have made it a mission of your life to actually have the art connect to something that's deeper and beyond you.
absolutely. Yes. So in the process of, and I have to use the word, I'll say waking up, in the process of waking up in this dream, it has come to me, it's become clear that every action is a matter of helping myself to wake up and helping others to wake up. So in the process of waking up, it's sort of like a ministry. We can think of it as a ministry. The more I wake up, the more the person next to me wakes up. And that's one of those things where we can bring in a term that's used in physics. It's called non-locality. And so we have lots of tests that have been conducted around the planet where groups of meditators have gone to cities and meditated intentionally and found that the crime rate dropped dramatically during the time that they were meditating. Now, this has been considered a fact by a number of people. We have James Twyman and a number of other individuals who have been doing this for decades. So, and we have Maharishi Yogi and followers and what have you that have been doing this transcendental meditation and finding that this transcendental meditation actually had a recognizable effect in the environment. So there are people who track this type of behavior and actually look at the Schumann frequency and how it changes when you have this large number of people that are doing something called meditating or praying or what have you. So what happens inside of us has an impact outside of us. And this idea of non-locality has something to do with the fact that we're all connected. So you already know that if you're connected to someone energetically or emotionally, you can know that they're in trouble, long distance. So our telephone lines, our inner telephone lines are always working. And if we take that thought into the question of what are we doing as an individual and what type of activism are we engaged with, we can say that this type of activism, where our thoughts and our feelings are having an impact far and wide, is something to take into serious consideration. And all of us are subject to have, I guess you might say, frustration or fear, at any moment. And those kinds of indulgences are expensive indulgences. They do cost us and they cost others. But we can't think of that in the moment. We're just having a knee-jerk reaction to something. So fear surfaces, terror, hatred, anger, any of those wild emotions that people have experienced forever. All of that factors into the equation. And then there's a balancing point where one can look across the landscape of their experience and say, okay, I went there, own it, and then say, how do I balance the scales? And so, how you balance the scales, you go back into a state of prayerfulness or worship or gratitude or appreciation. And those kinds of dynamics inside, once again, they touch any and everyone. So, I have what I'll call prayers where I will say, I apologize. Please forgive me. I love you. I appreciate you. I respect you. I thank you. Now, those are 7 statements that I borrowed from other people and put them together. And so that's my prayer. That is my prayer. And then I've translated it from I to we apologize. Please forgive us. We love you. We appreciate you. We respect you. We thank you. Now, those are powerful words with powerful force or energy behind them. And they are acts of creation. So that's how I pray. Of course, making art is a prayer. Making art is worship for me, and it always has been. But I had to grow into an awareness of the fact that I was worshiping in the process of making art. So I'm 60. I'm almost 68 now. I'm 67 and some change, and about to turn 68 in March. And so I've had a lot of time to think about what does it mean to be a creative, and what do these acts of creation mean, not just to myself but to others.
And when do you think you made that connection between not just religion and art, philosophy and art, but also math and art? 'Cause I know that there was an article that you sent me that was definitely talking about the hidden mathematics and a number of those things. So, at what point in your life do you think you made the connection between all of these elements together? And how did you go about making these connections? Because, like I said before, that's one of the things that has always fascinated me is how you have this kind of overlay of these different philosophies. So a lot of times folks will even try to separate. I sometimes think that our school systems separate them much too much. And that's just my philosophy, that I think that they sometimes need to find a way to integrate them more than they actually do.
Yes. Well, the more that we can marry these seemingly disparate disciplines, such as mathematics, uh, poetry, visual art, music. It's funny that we're having this conversation. Today, I reviewed chapter 2 of a book called The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse. And Hermann Hesse was on a spiritual journey all of his life. In fact, he had an encounter with Rudolf Steiner and a number of others during his time. And he was on this spiritual quest, and all of his writing indicated that he was on a spiritual quest, but he never said, I'm on a spiritual quest. He simply wrote stories about his spiritual quest and assigned those journeys to so-called fictitious characters. So I entered this relationship with mathematics through geometry. And in 1989, in fact, it was your mother that introduced me to Robert Lee Powell Sr. at the National Black Theater Festival in 1989, that summer. And the next day, I went to a workshop that he was conducting that lasted for 2 days. It was the part A and part B. And after that, I was hooked. And I was hooked simply because I had spent my younger years in, we'll say, drafting courses. I was in the 8th grade doing drafting at junior high school. Then I was in high school doing drafting from the 10th through the 12th grade. So I had a background with drafting. And as soon as I found myself in Robert Powell Sr.'s company, and he's taking us through an exercise where we're using a compass and a straight edge and ink pens and pencils and what have you, well, I'm hooked because it takes me all the way back to the 8th grade where I first had my taste of using a compass and a straight edge to make drawings. So it was a reintroduction, but the math part was difficult for me simply because I did not have a relationship with mathematics. I only had a relationship with geometry. And I have found out since then that a lot of people who have a facility with geometry do not have a facility with mathematics. It is not true across the board. So there's a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere they work in terms of processing data. And it turns out that the right hemisphere of the brain is processing data that has to do with geometry and spatial frequencies and music and what have you. And the left, now I might be wrong about this, and so someone can correct me, but the left hemisphere handles one type of information. It's considered to be the part that has to do with reason, linear thinking, rational and linear thinking. And the right side of the brain has to do with intuition. So my relationship to my mentor, Robert Lee Powell Sr., was that I saw him as a representation of the left hemisphere of the brain, and I saw myself as a representation of the right hemisphere of the brain. So we got along amicably simply because we were like two different sides of a brain working together synergistically. So that relationship lasted for 25 plus years, and I learned a lot about mathematics. In fact, now I can talk just a little bit of math, right? No algebra, and so hopefully that's a meaningful answer to your question.
No, that's a very meaningful answer and everything. You also talk about artists as and their intuition and how that plays into your artwork as well. So I was wondering if you could talk about that. And I know that you had an artwork that involved, I believe the gentleman's name was Paul Glee and all of that. So I was actually going to see about bringing one of those images up, and if you could share a little bit about that as well. So definitely that's one of the images that was there involving Paul Glee, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Right. He did a piece. His name is Paul Clay, and what Paul Clay did is he created what we conveniently call abstractions, and I would call most of them organic abstractions. This particular work of art is a 2019 celebration of the 100-year anniversary of his creating a work of art that was named New Angel, or in his language, it was Angelus Novus. So this particular composition is an organic abstraction, which I've been doing ever since I was a kid. And I've continued to do organic abstractions. And that's sort of like a totally different body of work from the geometric abstractions. So this composition, you see these wing-like strands that are running from the left and the right. And then the central column down the middle represents the body. You have a head there. And then you have these wavy patterns that actually represent the auric field or the energy field of this angelic being. And this is where intuition comes in. All of these works that I create that are considered to be organic abstractions are simply me like doing automatic writing, where I have not necessarily a vision in my conscious mind, but perhaps a vision in my subconscious mind. And the vision comes through, and it's almost like automatic writing. I just do the drawing, and the next thing I say is, wow, this is amazing. I'm excited about this. And I formalize them. I have really dozens of black and white studies that have been done for decades, and only 2 hands full of them have ever been formalized. Yeah.
Wow. But that's just one of your artworks. Like I said, you do so many amazing things. And one of the things that I know that this particular network, the International Broadcast Media, has talked about with their founders is the fact that they sometimes think that we are in while we're in the 21st century, we have an 18th century philosophy in the way that we teach education and in the way that we teach about different things, about art and a number of other things. As an artist and as one who is an artist in what I would consider also scientifically grounded art, how do you feel about that? Do you think that we need to do better in terms of even the way that we go about teaching our youth about art?
Well, we have some serious problems in what we call education. And if I were to say what I really believe, we would have a number of flags, red flag arise, where people would say, "Oh, God, he's a conspiracy theorist." So let me speak to that briefly. The word conspiracy theory was contrived, or I guess you might say invented in the war room of the CIA, for those who do not know that. And it was used as part of a psychological warfare against individuals who were speaking great truth. Right. So the CIA has had an interesting assignment for decades, and along with a number of other organizations that are under the auspices of what we can conveniently call government. And so education in general is inherently problematic because it is not about showing people how to think. It's about telling them what to think. So now we go back to Warmoth T. Gibbs at A&T State University during the sit-ins, and the city officials went to Warmoth T. Gibbs, who was the president at the time of college, A&T College at the time, and they said, Dr. Gibbs, you must tell your students to desist. And he told the city officials, at A&T College, we teach our students how to think, not what to think. And Warmoth T. Gibbs was actually a neighbor of mine. We lived in the same neighborhood, and I knew his grandchildren, and of course his son, um, and just an amazing spirit. But there are many people who have actually worked in education and known that education is problematic, inherently problematic, because people are being introduced to the concept of repetition versus the concept of exploration. So a real institution of higher learning is all about exploration. So we have Waldorf schools, and we have other schools, and just think about the unique educational programs that are at some of the Muslim schools and some of the other schools that do not teach like public education institutions. And what can I say? Programming is programming. I couldn't be programmed, which is very interesting. So I don't think like most people, simply because my focus was not on learning how to remember all of the data that was being presented to me that was supposed to be important and relevant. I'm an explorer, and that a person who is really awake in the world is an explorer, not someone who takes in a lot of data and says, okay, well, I can repeat this data and I can do exactly what I've been taught to do, which is to look at these patterns. There's a lot that I could say about learning and ways of learning and what have you, but I think I'll stop there and let's try another work of art. Okay.
Yep, I was definitely going to bring up that, and it actually has to do with education and all of that. And it's the piece that you did about the measuring of distances between the stars. So it was a doggone instrument for measuring the distance between stars, and definitely I'm a big fan of astronomy and all of that, as well as definitely a number of other things that have to do with the stars. So I was going to bring up an example of that work, and if you could share a little bit about what this is all about as I get ready to bring that one up as well. Because I know this is another piece that when I looked at it, I was like, that's another one of those powerful Van Dorn-handed pieces that I know a lot of folks will be very much interested in.
Yes. Okay. Well, the funny thing is, Mark, I just stumbled upon a video that Anna Maria took of me in the studio some years ago when I was making this. And I think it was in 2014. I'm not 100% sure. It could have been 2012, somewhere between 2012 and 2014. I was making this work, and it happens to be. It has a name that is a metaphorical assignment. It is not literally an instrument for measuring the distance between stars. I took poetic license to label it that. The color combinations come to me from the ancient Dogon habit of taking wooden artifacts and putting pigment on them. So you would have a dark wood, and then you would place white pigment on it, and so you'd have this high contrast between the dark wood and the white pigment, which is happening in ancient African cultures in many ways. Body adornment in terms of body painting and other types of patterning, where you have this high contrast between a light color and a dark color. So this composition with the dark brown and the off-white, what we have is this high contrast. And so it reads dark and light, and you have these tetrahedron on the surface. And I can't think of them. So I'm not even sure how many to say. Maybe there are 12. Yeah, there are probably 12 tetrahedron, and there are 12 flat surfaces. Tetrahedrons meaning a three-sided pyramid. So the idea is that I'm being playful with this title. I'm giving it the name, a Dogon instrument for measuring the distance between stars. Now, what that is designed to do is to stretch the imagination of the individual who's looking at the work of art. that individual looking at the work of art might say, how could this be an instrument to measure the distance between stars? Well, the fact is that it is a container, and on the interior could be anything. There could be scientific tools and devices that we can't see through the surface that could be engaged with or used for measuring the distance between stars. And so it leaves something for the imagination of the witness or the individual to experience and raise questions, come up with answers, stretch their imagination. That's basically the purpose of the not the work of art in of itself, but the purpose of the title. It's just to give
Right.
an individual an opportunity to become creative. They become co-creative with the artist, and they began to make up stories. You know, we're all making up stories, and the stories that we make up, they either stick or they fall away as something from the past. And so titles like this can be provocative and stimulating for people who witness it, and that's part of an artist's job, is to stimulate the imagination of others.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree with you more on that and everything. And there were some other images that went with that whole thing, so they can see other shapes and the other ways that it was formed. This great artwork of yours and everything. So definitely, I think you shot it in several different angles and all. So definitely, one of the things I've always been fascinated by the kind of artwork that you do is that some of the more realistic artwork is pretty much, you know what it is when you see it and everything. Meaning, like if there's a painting of a portrait like of Frederick Douglass, that's going to be Frederick Douglass. The same with the world famous pictures of the apples and the oranges and a number of other things like that. Whereas kind of the artwork that you do is definitely open for interpretation. I mean, there's definitely things that you have in your mind when you create the artwork, but then the audience member or the person that's looking at the artwork may interpret it differently. Your artwork always kind of reminds me of like the ways that we interpret the designs of clouds. Like, you know, I may look at a cloud and see a big ship. Somebody else may look at that same cloud and see a spaceship. And that's the way a lot of artists like you that do these kind of geometrics or abstract art, that's what I always get from them. Would you say that that's kind of the reaction that you usually get from audience members and everything? Or do you think that they generally have an idea of what you have in mind when you create the artwork?
It would be my suspicion that they have no idea what I'm intending. And so they're, in a manner of speaking, they're left to rely upon their imagination and their creativity, in effect. And so here's where my role as a shaman / artist gets to be exciting. I don't tell people what to think, just like Warren T. Gibbs says about education. We do not teach our students what to think, we teach them how to think. Now, I want to tie that back in, segue back into the geometry, but the idea is that to stimulate the imagination of anyone is probably one of the most noble acts that a person can walk with or articulate. And I say that because everywhere that I find myself moved with emotion and gratitude, it happens to be where I find myself stimulated to go beyond the limits that I was experiencing momentarily or that I had previously experienced. Limits in terms of what I'll call my imagination. So I believe that our imaginations are continuously being stimulated. And as long as we let our hearts guide us in the response, that true response can only result in good. So it's always a question of how is a person's mind configured to receive information, to receive stimulation? What do they do with it? Because if we are walking in fear, then something not so good is going to happen. But if we're conditioned to walk in love, gratitude, appreciation, something wonderful happens. Doors open. We experience new vistas. And there's always a horizon in front of us, each one of us. The new, the unexplored, the unexplained, all of that's in front of us. And so life is continuously offering us opportunities to explore the unknown. And once again, if we walk with gratitude, appreciation, and love in our hearts and in our minds, we're going to find something beautiful. And well, and it's a simple formula for success actually is to walk with gratitude and appreciation. And yeah,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and definitely, I know one of the other things that you've always been a big fan of, and it's one of the things that you share in common with a number of family members and everything, is a love of jazz and a love of music. And I know one of the other pieces that I wanted to have you talk about was the works that you've been doing around the Black Notes, which a lot of folks will be knowing that that's about the keys and a number of things like that. So I definitely love to hear you talk about that importance in the story as well, because I definitely think that that's something that a lot of folks will be interested in hearing your thoughts about Black Notes and its connection to the style of artwork that you do and everything. So I'd love to hear you talk about that, and I'll bring up some of those images as well.
so Mark, one of the things that this particular piece is titled "The Black Notes." So the exterior body is black, and the subtitle is "Sometimes Blue." So it's Black Notes in parentheses, sometimes blue. And so the interior, you see this five-pointed star in the interior, but that's actually a convex area, or is it concave? Concave area. And if you show another view, just show several different views of that one if you can.
Yes.
That's looking at the interior. That's looking at it from somewhat of an oblique side view, and that's sort of like an oblique back view. And then that's another oblique front view. So what happens, Mark, is that as soon as you brought the subject of music up, I was reminded of a dream that I shared with Anna Maria. It just happened within the last 24 or 48 hours. And that's another one. And the interior of this one is purple. And that one is titled The Black Notes, and has something to do with purple and a particular note. I don't know if it's F sharp or A flat. I'm really not remembering the subtitle, but it's related to a note that is associated with the color purple. So, and some of us know that the color purple has to do with nobility, but it also has the spiritual dimension of our lives. So it sort of takes our attention towards the metaphysical. And since this is a portal that you're seeing through this form, so it sort of speaks to that portal of consciousness that we're always facing, and that portal of consciousness is within us. And so I want to go back to what happened in this dream. I was actually playing with a few wind instruments, and I was really having a lot of fun with these two individuals in this room, and it was sort of like an accompaniment thing that was going on. And I didn't even have complete instruments. I just had parts of wind instruments that I was playing. And I have a little bit of a background with music. I once had a clarinet when I was a kid, and I told my parents I didn't want a clarinet, I wanted a saxophone. So now I actually have Vernon Pratt's saxophone. Yes, his widow gave it to me when she was still living, and I haven't chosen to learn how to play it, but I pull it out every now and then and make a little noise on it, just to try to seduce myself into giving more time. I don't have the time, so it's good. Oh, excuse me, this thing is trying to fall behind me. Anyway, I'm having to leave the saxophone in the case now, but you said something earlier about music, and now I'm trying to find my way back to it. These two forms. Oh yeah, I saw a video, Thelonious Monk playing the keyboards just a few weeks ago, and he was playing a tune, and he was using all of the black notes, and it looked like he did not touch one of the white keys. And I shouldn't say black notes, but the black keys on a piano, which are sharps and flats for someone who knows something about music. And I was just fascinated and blown away that he was creating this, amazing tune just using the black keys on the keyboard. And we both know something about the history of blues and the fact that these notes, the sharps and the flats, are the notes that are used more than any other notes when it comes to the blues, and when it comes to jazz, and when it comes to much music that's made by people from the African diaspora.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I love that piece and everything. I did want to also talk about some of the ways that your artwork ties into history and everything. But one of the other pieces that fascinated me when you sent me some of the information was the fact that a lot of times, and we talked about it earlier, artists will sometimes do things that are statements of change, statements of making a statement of even trying to add to the change and to the dialogue and all of that. And I know that you had a statement, and I'm trying to find it in the email that you sent me about resurrection and this being a time that we needed a resurrection. So I was definitely wanting to hear more about your thoughts around that, because when I read that, I was like, oh, that's really deep, because it was like your call for a mass resurrection, all
Yes.
of that. And I can actually pull up what you said to me, but it was, so even shared a little bit of our history, meaning the history of African Americans and other minorities here in this United States and everything. But definitely, you talked about this back in 2019, and you even tied it into being a tribal shaman. So I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about what you wrote, and if you don't mind, I can even pull it up.
Oh, yes. Well, what happened? I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I definitely wanted us to cover this territory. This particular short piece that I wrote was part of a proposal so that I could be considered for a sculptural or public artwork in, I'm not so sure which state it was now. It could have been Florida or either South Carolina. I'm not certain anymore. But is that the text right there?
That's the text.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't read it.
It just said resurrection, the transatlantic slave trade was driven by a radical disregard for the lives and humanity of African people. There are many instances when the opportunity presented itself, the captive Africans threw themselves overboard during transit from their motherland. These spirits have roamed the oceans for centuries, restless and unbound. Their essence continues to echo in the hearts and minds of their kin. I know I am one of them. A reckoning wants very much to happen. Many of these unbound and restless spirits continue to fall forth windows of opportunity for a just honoring of their people. And then you go on from there.
Yes. Well, yeah, like I said, that was written as part of a proposal for being considered to create a work of art that had to do with the transatlantic trade. I talk about the fact that my ancestors, my African ancestors, were never slaves. They were prisoners of war. And I like to change the conversation from the notion of having been a slave to having been a prisoner of war, because that recontextualizes the experience. That gives us a place of power where we recognize that this was actually warfare against a people, even if our cousins sold us into what we conveniently call slavery. We know that this institution of slavery has been going on for millennia, and we have many examples: Native Americans, people in India, the caste system, Africa, Europe. But when the Europeans began to take Africans and bring them to the Americas, there was a degree of brutality, in my estimation, that was far greater than what I imagined other levels of brutality having been exercised against other people at other times and other cultures than what we conveniently call the slave trade or the industry of slavery. So the comment that's made in that statement has to do with the fact that we have these ancient ways of knowing that are more holistic in effect, where, back to the first comments that I made, every action is an act of creation. Whatever we do as an individual has an effect, a far reaching impact in the landscape. So the idea of resurrecting ancient ways of knowing, ancient ways of being, where you have a group of people who are looking at the question, how do we serve the future in such a way that those that come behind us can fare better than we fared? And that's one of the questions that wants to be raised globally. We know this. So it is a global call to action, these issues that I'm bringing forth in these writings. And there was another piece that I wanted to send you. I have a work of art that's in India now. And what I did is I took the work of art, it's a sacred geometry piece of artwork, and it has the colors red, black, and green. And I created it with the idea that someone from the African diaspora would recognize this composition as being relevant to a cause and might want to adopt it. And right now, Kevin Sipp and his wife, Unica, down in Atlanta, have a project that they are using that particular image of that work of art as part of a fundraiser that they're doing, which I'm very excited about, and it has to do with a long trail, and I forgot how many miles it is. It might be, I'm not so sure, it might be 400 miles, and I'll get that information to you later. I can't think of the name of the project right now, but anyway, this particular work of art, I took in Photoshop and I put words across the top, and that's where the idea was recorded back in 2018 of my ancestors not having been slaves, but having been prisoners of war. So once again, we have an opportunity at every turn. Okay, this thing is trying to fall now. I guess I'll just take it down. Yeah, we have an opportunity at every turn to do ourselves a great favor and raise consciousness around us. But how can we raise consciousness if our consciousness is not at a high frequency? So it is incumbent upon us to find a way to raise our consciousness so that we can in turn raise other people's consciousness. And that's just a way of talking about being a servant to one's community, being a servant to humankind, and changing the conversation from taking to giving.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that one of the things that you also did that also honors history and everything, and I was going to bring this up as well, is because I always think of your work as also being a opportunity to honor some of our ancestors of the past. And one of those that you honored recently, or not that long ago, was none other than Harriet Tubman, where you did a piece about her and everything. So I was going to have you talk a little bit about that as well, and just why you felt it was very important to honor the great civil rights leader Harriet Tubman and everything. But definitely that's just one of the images, but we've got a couple of more that I'll show as well. But you can clearly say that it's got the words freedom in it and a number of other pieces. But I'd love to hear about this work as well.
Well, thank you. It's very interesting. The story goes all the way back to 2012. The National Alliance of Artists from HBCUs has a group exhibition every year. In fact, the exhibition that I'm in India is a National Alliance of Artists from HBCUs group exhibition. And it's been traveling around India now for a number of months. This particular piece grew out of a composition that I created that was about 42 inches tall. It was an interior work of art made out of wood. It was made for this exhibition at the Hampton University Museum in 2012, where this group was exhibiting. And the subject was, and we do thematic exhibitions almost every year, it had to do with the period of Reconstruction in the South. So what I did is I took a 6-sided composition and I put text that was the voice of 6 different individuals, 3 women from European ancestry and 3 women from African ancestry. One of those individuals happened to be Harriet Tubman. With her words, her most famous quote, I freed, how did she say it? I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed more if only they had known they were slaves. And that's a crude paraphrase for the quote. But on the one side of this 4-sided pyramid that you see on this image is a quote by Harriet Tubman. And what I did was I began this series with the idea of creating more, paying homage to Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, just about anybody that you can think of as being an historical figure that was a freedom fighter. I was even looking at doing one to pay homage to Nelson Mandela, lots of people, Rosa Parks, just on and on and on. The list goes on. Now, I don't know if I'll get around to doing any of these other sculptures, but right now I have 2 that are 8.5 to 9 feet tall. This is an homage to Harriet Tubman, the first one. The second one is an homage to Martin Luther King Jr. And so both of those have been realized now, and they're both out in the public. That one right now is at the LeBauer Park in Greensboro, next to the Cultural Arts Center. The other one that pays homage to Martin Luther King Jr. is actually that was at the LeBauer Park right there. That's a visual of it at the LeBauer Park. And it's also designed to be lit from within. And there's an image of it lit from within. The other one is designed to be lit from within. So the text is actually cut out of the metal. And then I have an interior light. I have plexiglass on the inside. And then I have the interior light for evening viewing. The one for Martin Luther King Jr. is the same. The bottom's different. The top is the same shape, and the bottom has a different shape. In fact, I think you have some images of that also. I just remembered. So I'm very excited about the series. And right now, Hickory, North Carolina is looking at the possibility of buying one of them. So we'll see. I don't know. I'd love to have them placed. Lots of interest has been expressed. Now, originally, they did a small 27-inch tall work that was paying homage to Harriet Tubman, which is a variation on that theme. It happens to be in a group exhibition in Fayetteville right now. Fayetteville is hosting a two-venue exhibition of the National Alliance of Artists from HBCUs. So that composition is there. It was also in Savannah, Georgia, at the first part of last year. It's been shown a few times. Yeah.
And you were asking about the Martin Luther King one. I did find that one as well, so I'll bring that up for folks to check out also, so they can see that one. But that's the one you were referring to that you had sent about MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., and also that's definitely the one revolving around his legacy.
Yes, and what's interesting about both of these sculptures, and I plan on doing this with each one, there are two quotes on there that are from the individual that I'm paying homage to. Then there's a third quote on the surface of each one that I created as if the individual was speaking. So the one for Harriet Tubman reads, the quote that I created, attributing it to her, reads, "I, Harriet Tubman, stand for the freeing of my enslaved people." And the one for Martin Luther King Jr., the quote that I created, attributing it to him, reads, "I, Martin Luther King Jr., stand for the freeing of the enslaved minds and hearts of all people." So I'm pretty excited to be able to take artistic license and actually apply my gift as a poet and a wordsmith to each one of these sculptures. And I'm imagining that the spirits of these individuals would not have a problem with that, if you understand what I'm saying. Yeah.
I don't think they would have a problem with that in the least bit. As a matter of fact, they probably greatly appreciate it. I know that one of the people that's involved with the network and everything talks about the fact that he is from India, and it sounds like you've done some having some pieces there. I was just wondering if you could talk about what Eastern religion and Eastern thought mean to you and everything, and how that even plays into some of your own work. Because I do think that, as I recall, that you've definitely had some Eastern philosophies that you are a proponent of as well.
Yes. Well, what's interesting is that wherever we find truth, I'm identified. Okay. And when I use the word truth, that's a tricky proposition. But imagine this. Imagine truth being relative. And so each one of us is walking with our own special and unique case that we call truth. And for me, all religions, all ideologies have beautiful, deep truths that bubble to the surface whenever we get dogmatic thinking pushed to the side and eliminated from the equation. And so some of the deep truth that we find in Buddhism, in Taoism, in every religion, Islam, obviously the thinking of Sufis, which is the mystical side of Islam, the Rosicrucians, which would be considered the mystical side of Christianity. You have these amazing, rich truths, and they're all worded differently, but they all mean the same thing. And a person who is living in their sacred center recognizes truth in all of these teachings. Beautiful example, Jalaluddin Rumi, 13th century Persian mystic poet, also known as a Sufi. When he passed, people from all of the religions of the world at that time came to pay homage to him because he embraced the truth in all of the religions. And only in modern times, and I'll use the modern times as meaning the last several hundred years, and I don't know how far back to go, we have found humans using religious ideology to take advantage of situations, to manipulate the masses. And that's one of the most insane acts that can be executed by an individual or a group of individuals to manipulate consciousness towards the ends of gaining some type of control or some type of benefit. We're here to serve and not serve ourselves, but to serve others. And people who walk in service to others, you'll find a certain beauty that emanates from them that can't not be overlooked and cannot be mistaken for anything else.
Yeah. I was going to bring up another thing that you did in a city that I know quite well as well, which is Winston-Salem, and that's the Twin City sculptures that you did. But I was wondering if you could also share, because a lot of these things we've been showing have been works of public art, and definitely there is a rise in public art throughout the country, and I would even argue throughout the world. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of public art and whether you think that enough of the public even knows the great art that is staring at them in the face. Because sometimes I've seen some amazing public art that's out there, and then you see the common person that may not even understand the message behind the artwork. But I was just wondering your thoughts on that, and also if you think we're doing a good enough job with our public art, as I bring up the image of Twin City, and if you want to share a little bit about what Twin City is about as well.
All right. Well, let me try to address the first part of the question.
Yeah.
Public art is capable of serving the purpose of raising consciousness. And for me, if it isn't raising consciousness, then I have a hard time accepting the notion that it is of any benefit or any value. Now, that's all relative again, because everybody's at a different state of consciousness. And so what would raise another's consciousness might appear to be a negative variable or factor in my experience. Not that I would choose or allow it to be, but I'm just saying that to say that this idea of raising consciousness is all relative. I like to think that we are creating works of art and sharing it with the public that will, once again, stimulate the imagination, provoke critical thinking, which is a step towards clear thinking. So my work in particular, especially working with the geometry, I have found that more and more people find themselves responding, saying that this work stimulates their imagination. It causes them to raise questions. It causes them to do more associative thinking. And associative thinking is intimately related to critical thinking and clear thinking. So I like the idea of being of service to humankind by way of creating works of art that are stimulating to the mind, to the intellect, and has people asking questions and putting the question before themselves, well, what does this mean? Now, when a person is inspired to ask that question, in my estimation, that's a good thing. Even if a person says, I don't like what I'm looking at, they're still engaged in critical thinking. And critical thinking is absolutely essential in terms of the survival of the species. At least that's a conjecture that I'm willing to sell myself and put forth tonight. And I don't have to be right, but that's where I'm.
And definitely, like I said, I was going to bring up the Together We Rise piece that you did in Winston-Salem, because like I said, I spent some time there, living there and everything. So definitely Winston-Salem does have a special place in my heart, but I love this piece and everything. So if you want to share a little bit about that as well.
Right. The city wanted them to be taller, but we could not afford to make them taller because it was a budget that I had to be mindful of. So I made them as tall as I could make them. They stand right at 11 feet tall. The top part is made out of stainless steel. Those are all triangles. There are 3 different types of triangles that I use to create these 2 twin columns. And I call them twin columns. They're titled Together We Rise. I created that title paying homage to Maya Angelou and her poem, And Still We Rise. That's where the title was actually grafted from, And Still We Rise. And so I titled them Together We Rise. They are twin monuments. One represents the city of Salem. The other one represents the city of Winston. In 1913, the 2 cities, so the one that you're looking at that's on the left, that represents the city of Salem. The one that you're looking at that's on the right, that represents the city of Winston. And so, no, I have it backwards. Yeah, the one that's on your right represents the city of Winston. The one that's on your left represents the city of Salem. And you see there are actually these gold-looking rectangular patterns on top of the green triangular bases. Those panels have text on it. The text of individuals who actually lived in Winston-Salem. And the text, I believe the text is from 3 or 4 different individuals, and each one of them played an important role in the city of Winston-Salem. And that's what they are. They're actually twin columns that represent Salem and Winston before they were married. They were commissioned. This is actually the first commission that the city of Winston-Salem paid for out of its pocket. So they had a small budget, and I met them halfway. They're swallowed up in the Corpening Plaza, but if you get close to them, they do tower over you. You can see I'm standing at 6'2", and they're, like I said, 11 feet tall.
Well, definitely. I know that here in Durham, there was a movement of young folks, and there might have been some folks in their 50s and 40s involved as well. They were trying to make sure that artists actually got their just dues, that they actually got paid, and that they were actually able to live and thrive off of their art and everything of that nature. And I was just wondering, as an artist, what is your thoughts about being a working artist and actually making a living as an artist? Because, like I said, they were trying to get the city to actually create some stipends and things of that nature, and they were going in front of City Hall and were actually having some traction on the notion. And then the pandemic happened, so that kind of stopped whatever movements were going in that direction. But I was just wondering your thoughts about being an artist and trying to survive and thrive as an artist in this day and time that we're in.
Well, my contention would be that it has always been difficult for creatives. We have a few down through the ages who have been sponsored, who have had benefactors and what have you. I've had a little sponsorship along the way, which I can't talk about, but I've had some gifts bestowed upon me on a few occasions. And I also think about the fact that my North Carolina Artist Fellowship that I received in 1994, I was just telling someone who works for the International Sculpture Center yesterday on the phone. I was telling the person that the reason that I got that grant that year in my heart, in my mind, is because 2 African-American women were panelists in terms of the review panel. They could feel the importance of what I was creating as an artist. There really is such a thing as a sense of identification with aesthetic. So we have the aesthetic sensibilities that I was working with during that time. The work that I presented, it was all two-dimensional, but I had 2 panelists that, once again, were from the African diaspora, and they both stood for me, and I was able to receive a grant. Now, that's only happened once, and it would be great if we could find our way as a collective into an area of respecting the intrinsic value that artists walk with. Most artists want to be of service. Most artists want to do something that is edifying for their contemporaries. This is my contention. I would like to believe that I am right, that I'm speaking truth here. I would like to think that there aren't that many artists out there who feel as though it is their job to hurt someone or to harm someone or to reduce consciousness. I believe that most of us are driven with a desire to serve humankind. So my thought of what a true artist is an individual who walks with that as part of their purpose, is to lift others up, to inspire others, to live by and teach by example. And so the idea of financing artists is a wonderful idea. How can we get there? We have to change our social constructs. We have to change our ideologies. We have to stop believing in some of the notions that are poisoning us at every turn. And those notions having to do with, there's one person over here that's above a person over there. The caste system in India, I find it a tragedy and a travesty. The caste system in America, I find it a travesty and a tragedy. All caste systems, if I may use that term as an umbrella term, where you have less thans and others, those who are considered to be less deserving than others, all of that needs to be replaced with something that we can do as a collective. We can actually love one another, respect one another, lift one another up. That day is a day that I'm living for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Another thing that your artwork does on a regular basis, just kind of changing the topic just slightly and everything, is I've always been noticing that your artwork also ties into nature, and a lot of times nature plays a part in your artwork. And I was actually pulling up one of the pieces that you sent me, which is actually titled Raven, and is actually showing in what looks like a park and all of that. So I'd love to hear you talk about the importance of nature to your artwork, but also a little bit about this piece entitled Raven, and I will bring an image of that up as well.
Raven happens to be a sculpture that stands about 8.5 feet tall, and it's made out of metal. It's made out of aluminum. I titled it Raven simply because it reminded me of a bird figure, and so we would say that this is an abstraction at best. And the form, actually, the middle section of the form is actually modeled on something that's called an icosahedron. The top part, which represents the head of the raven, is modeled on an octahedron. So an octahedron being an 8-sided form made of equilateral triangles. Then there's another view of it. That's at the Piedmont International Airport right now. It's on loan there for a second year. And so you see this figure that looks like a standing figure. It is an abstraction. I call it Raven, once again, simply because it reminds me of a bird, and it's painted, the body is painted black, so I'm calling it a raven. It actually has 2 holes in it at the top that represent eyes, and those holes have marbles, that glass marbles in them, so you have this sense of eyes in the form. The raven represents the mystical. It represents transformation. It has to do with creativity and the creative forces. And every culture has a story about what the raven means, the symbology, and it's relative to the culture. So I can't speak specifically, but in general, the raven has to do with the mystical dimension of our lives and creativity and transformation. So that's all I can say about that particular piece.
Yeah. And what would you tell to the folks that are in a much younger generation, or even those, like I said earlier, that might be starting late in life, maybe they're starting in their 50s, that they want to get involved in this art game? And in a lot of ways, it is a business, it is a game and everything and all of that. But what kind of advice would you give to folks that want to get involved in the art industry and everything?
Well, that takes me back to perhaps almost 4 decades ago, when the question was, if you were to give advice to a group of young people in regards to this question, advising them to pursue the arts, the visual arts in particular, or not, my answer at that particular time was, don't do it unless you cannot not do it. So that question still comes up, and I'm still applying the same answer. Leave it alone unless you find yourself compelled to do it. If there's something that's driving you from deep within your being, that has you living with a burning passion to do something creative, follow that passion, follow that drive, see where it takes you. I would not advise anyone to just take it up as a casual affair or hobby or whatever. Those people, I would ask them to find something else to do, something that really juices them, as people say, really gets them excited. Making things is, there's a responsibility in making something. What we make wants to serve a purpose. What we make ideally wants to be edifying, if not for ourselves, for others. So the idea of making something that is of service to another or to humanity is what I consider to be the true purpose of an artist. I can't. So music is something that we make as individuals and we make collectively. Music is medicine, and I always think of music as being medicine. For me, everything that we do is medicinal. So you have bad medicine, you have good medicine. And the question is, which one do you gravitate to? And bad medicine can be degrading. We have lots of examples of bad medicine, so we won't talk about that tonight. Yeah. We have too many examples of bad medicine in music, in theater, in just about every area of what we call human endeavor. But it's the good medicine that we're looking for. It's the good medicine that we're looking to be a part of or be about. So once again, we can do this wonderful act of giving of ourselves, being of service to humankind.
And along those same lines, I know that I've got my own personal wish for my own existence, definitely the existence of family members as well as friends and everything. Some of the folks may consider them unrealistic expectations or wishes and all of that. So I want Van Doren Hennett to be around for another 100, 150 years and all of that. But knowing that that is probably not all that possible in the real world and everything, what would you like the legacy of Van Doren Hennett to be? So, like I said, if folks are watching this and they want to know what the legacy is of Mr. Hennett, what are you hoping you are leaving behind as your legacy whenever that is? And like I said, I'm rooting for you to be around till you're 200.
Thank you. There is a man that I met in Atlanta at Morehouse College. Let's see, what year was it? I think it was somewhere between 2002 and 2004. He is no longer with us. His first name is difficult for me to pull up, but his last name was Fukau, Fukaiu or something. And some people hearing that name might recognize his name. He actually lived in America for a long time. He was a Congolese shaman who was educated with a Westerner's education and came to America. He actually did prison reform programs. He worked with prisoners, and he also worked with people in educational institutions. Dr. Fukau impressed upon me during this lecture that he gave at Morehouse College that in our African tradition, our family tree is such that the ancestors are at the bottom of the family tree, and so the branches are the progeny. So those who stand on the shoulders of their ancestors want to be people who are drawing upon the ancestral wisdom in such a way that those who come after them can draw upon the ancestral wisdom. And it continues to be a matter of branching, but it's a branching upward and outward into infinity. And so one of the beautiful experiences that I'm having right now is that I'm actually in a book called Mind of My Mind by Octavia Butler, which happens to be the last book that she wrote. So her legacy is a beautiful legacy. She actually believed that she was going to live long enough to see the fruits of her labors. She did not. Her life was cut short by an incident where she was outside and she fell and her skull cracked, and that was it. But what she leaves for us is some really deep thought. The book that I find most intimately connected to Mind of My Mind is a book that she wrote earlier titled Pattern Master. So I've had the experience of reading Pattern Master. I'm perhaps halfway through Mind of My Mind, and I'm looking at this question that you're raising, legacy. Everything that I do that is left behind, that I have created, has the potential of touching someone else. I may not be there to see how it touches them, but I do know, because of experience, and I like to speak to that. I do know, because of experience, the incident that I told you about, the healthcare practitioner who saw one of my works of art and told me she had a spontaneous healing in her left shoulder. In 1993, I was in Atlanta. I had a solo exhibition at Hammond's House Galleries, the largest piece of artwork in the show. I had a person who sat in the back of the room when I gave a slide lecture after the reception. This woman speaks up and says, when I saw that work of art in the front gallery, I was immediately transported to when I was coming through the birth canal. So the work of art, opened up a portal of memory for her to experience something that she had not even thought about since she was being birthed. And that's related to many other experiences that people have of my work, where they have these mystical or psychological, emotional breakthroughs, physiological transformations. I know that what I'm doing has a profound impact. And so one of the things that I've said is that I'm a messenger. It is never about me. It's always about the message. So I'm simply a guy who came here and agreed to deliver some messages to humankind. And those messages will be left behind. And whoever is to receive those messages, whenever, wherever, that's none of my business. And that's the beauty that I walk with, that I'm not attached to who gets to have this experience when and where. That's none of my business. My business is to manifest these, what we conveniently call works of art, for posterity. And so that would be my legacy. The fact that I came here, I delivered these messages, and I left. Yeah.
Interesting you said that because actually I've got a good friend of mine who's a funk musician, and he oftentimes talks about the similar kind of message of wanting to spread messages of spiritual growth and joy and all of that. And definitely he feels that he is even though he doesn't feel he's accomplished it all yet, he feels that he's got a reason for being here on this planet that involves the use of his music to get his message out. And I've heard that from a number of folks. It might be filmmakers, it might be musicians like this particular gentleman, or it might be artists like yourself. So definitely it seems to me that we're all put down here on this earth to have a set mission that is part of our life goal and our life journey and everything. And I guess one of the great things that you have to do is understand what that mission is in your life. And it sounds to me that both you and Zach have found y'all's missions and are trying to make sure that you accomplish them before ending this existence here on this earthly plane.
Right. Now, your words remind me of the fact that we encounter people as we are doing our life walk that inspire us. They open up new vistas for us just by being who they are. So we may not know who's watching us or who's listening to us, whose life is touched in such a way that they have a transformative experience. So Jose Arguelles leaves us with a beautiful book titled The Transformative Vision, which I have been heavily identified with as a sort of like a cosmological map. Part of my cosmological map is this idea that what we do is part of a holistic transformative vision that we can't necessarily touch, we can't necessarily see, but we can feel it. And in our hearts and minds, we can know that whatever we're doing has a place, has a time, has a reason. And whatever season this effect manifests, it's beautiful. It's none of our business. Once again, our job is to do what we came to do, to know that we're serving humankind. The very thought of living a life of service is an act of creation. It is like surrendering the ego to something that is greater than the ego. Musicians do it, poets do it, visual artists do it, theologians do it. You know, we have people in every walk of life, medicine, I can't think of the sciences. I mean, look at all of the individuals who, when you read their life story and you see that they were deeply spiritual, even though at the time they would not necessarily appear to be, and they certainly wouldn't necessarily be standing up in the front of an audience saying, "Hey, everybody, you have to get this spiritual message here." It isn't about that. You know, a highly spiritual person never has to talk about spirituality. They never have to talk about religion. They never have to talk about politics. They can just be a living example. And that's the beauty of being an undercover agent. You know, I like to think of myself as an undercover agent, right? So, you know, I walk around and I pretend as though I'm an artist, but in reality, I'm an agent of change. And it's happening. You know, you cannot experience beauty. And that takes us back to nature. You were mentioning nature.
Right.
Everything that I have created is actually related to nature in the sense that all of the geometry is related to nature. You see all of these beautiful patterns in nature. Every cross section of every piece of vegetation that you could cut is going to have a pattern in it. Watermelon, for example, cantaloupe, do a cross section of it, it has threefold symmetry. Cucumber, threefold symmetry. yellow squash, threefold symmetry. Green squash, you have three, four, and five-fold symmetry. You have three, four, five-fold symmetry. And red, I might have said the wrong thing. I meant bell peppers. So you have red bell peppers and green bell peppers. But really, everything that you can cut and cut a cross-section of in nature, you're going to see symmetry. Even in carrots, you'll see sort of like a six-fold symmetry pattern. So, and this has something to do with the way atoms congeal or organize themselves in space. So the double helix, for example, is a pattern that exists simply because these relationships have to be what they are in order for life to exist. So we're carbon-based life forms, and everything congeals in a geometric form. So, and everybody that studies science knows that. So you see the beauty in the artwork only because you're looking at some evidence of a natural order. And I appreciate us both getting back to that question, because you did raise that question earlier.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. Definitely glad that you got back to that and everything. And one of the other things that you mentioned earlier that I'd love to hear your thoughts about is how important do you think it is for us as people on this planet at this particular time to be tied to our ancestral background, be that both old ancestors like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, but also what folks might consider new ancestors or folks that have now joined the Ancestral Alliance, be that folks like Phil Freelon, Baba Chuck Davis, and the names of others could go on that I could also include in that as well. But how important do you think it is for us to be connected to our ancestral lineage?
All of those that have gone before us are actually still connected to us, and they cannot be removed from the equation. So we don't know it at a conscious level, but there's always this voice that is moving through our awareness. A perfect example is Lucille Clifton, a beautiful African-American poet. One of her famous short pieces, I'm trying to recall it. In fact, I might even have it in my office someplace. It goes like this. In populated air, my ancestors continue. I have seen them. I have heard their shimmering voices singing. And that takes us back to that beautiful piece. Come on, help me with it. It's the Daughters of the Dust. Right. Remember the film? Yeah, right. And there's another one with Sankofa. So Sankofa and Daughters of the Dust both have us looking at that continuity of our ancestors always being with us. And we have all of these amazing writers, but from every culture. It doesn't matter what culture you're identified with. There's an identification with ancestors, and that identification is absolutely necessary. We cannot run, we cannot hide from our ancestors. We can only surrender to the influence that they have on our lives. And in that surrendering comes some great wisdom is imparted. So, listen, and as they say, listen up. Yes. That takes me back to that beautiful quote from the Judeo-Christian lineage, which is, "Be still and know that I am God." Well, when we get to be still, then we get to know. And there's something, from the ancient tradition, know means becoming intimate with, and so becoming one with. And so that's the way I translate that phrase, "Be still and know that I am God." I've always translated that to mean, be still and know, become one with me. So, and that's something that is true in all of the ancient traditions, all of the so-called religious traditions or spiritual traditions, that simple act of getting still and knowing.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because that's one of the things that I've had several conversations over the last several months, ever since the pandemic started and everything. But it seems to me that this whole crisis that we've been in the middle of has actually got more of us to do exactly what you're saying we should have been doing all along. Because I've heard a number of folks that said that they have used this time to reassess themselves, to actually be still, to actually have a time of reflection and things of that nature. Now that there is vaccines out there, and probably more and more people are getting out to the ways that they used to be. But it does seem that there was a time frame where we did have a lot of folks that were actually becoming more inner reflective, like we probably should have been doing all along. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
it slowed a lot of people down. It slowed me down. I had to come to terms with some of my ego constructs that were not serving me well. And the biggest one was I want to be successful. I've had that thing driving me like a demon much of my life, simply because I had a passion for doing what I was doing. For me, success only means being able to afford to do what I have a passion for doing. It doesn't have to do with amassing money so much as it has to do with having the resources to do what I find myself passionate about. And so that slowing down, being still, this what I call this global lockdown, is given a lot of people a lot of time to stop and listen to that inner voice, to become more acquainted with it, to ask critical questions. What is my purpose? What can I do now? How can I do something that will be to the benefit of others? The question continues to come up. When you get quiet, you're sitting with yourself, and there's this feedback loop between the higher self and the lower self, or what I call the ego self, the pedestrian self, and the higher self, the inner self. So that feedback loop is a state of can be a matter of introspection, reflection, um, and we get to learn some things about ourselves if we can go there.
And speaking of learning stuff about ourselves and everything, I was actually having this conversation with a lady that does fashion work, and I think she might have done some music, and a couple of other folks that are in that art space and everything. And we were trying to decide, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is can you be successful as an artist without going through some trials and tribulations? Or is trials and tribulations part of being a success? Whether those trials and tribulations are relationship trials and tribulations, whether they're other kind of like more active kinds of trials and tribulations, but do you have to go through trials and tribulations in order to be successful as an artist?
Okay, one of the beautiful stories from my past is the story of the little boy who saw a cocoon, and he said, I'll open up the cocoon and help the whatever's inside of it come out. So he took some type of instrument, cut the cocoon open, and when the butterfly came out of the cocoon, instead of its wings having been developed, it ended up just basically dying, because it had not gone through the natural process of struggling to get out of the cocoon. So each one of us in our development can think of ourselves as being in a cocoon, and we're trying to get out of that cocoon. We're trying to find our wings, so to speak, so that we can fly. And it is my belief that those trials, tribulations, struggles are absolutely necessary to develop character, to develop strength, so that we can develop perseverance, and we can actually put things into perspective and be able to appreciate the challenges that we went through in order to get where we are going, or where we get to at any particular moment, whatever plateau we find ourselves at in the process. That's all it is. It's a plateau. And we can either go up from there or we can go down from there. But we're always standing at a plateau, at a place where, once again, we can go higher or we can go lower, or have greater success or less success. And that's always a matter of, well, what is our life's journey supposed to be about? It is supposed to be about what it is about. We're always learning. But those trials and tribulations are absolutely necessary for me, in my estimation. And I don't see how we can grow without them.
I would definitely agree with you on that. I definitely think that it's stuff that we have to go through, whether, like I said, whether it's relationship, whether it's family, or whether it's a number of other kinds of trials and tribulations. I know I've even gone through some in the work environment and all of that. One of the other things I was talking to somebody about earlier and everything, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is, and you had actually mentioned this earlier about having that passion for the art and needing to have that drive to do the art. But we do find a number of artists that have that passion, but they also feel that they have to have the proverbial day job in order to survive, because they're not able to make enough money off of their art and everything along that line. So what is your advice to those that feel that they almost have to go into, say, being an Uber driver, or a working at a restaurant, or some other kind of job that puts money in their pocket, when their real passion is doing their artwork?
Right. Well, I had to work most of my life. There are a few short moments of my walk where I was actually able to support myself with my art. And those, I never took a look at it and answered the question, well, how many years did I do this? In fact, that still is not relevant. But did just about anything that I had to do to make it possible for me to do my art. So there's no reason for anyone to uh, feel ashamed of having to do what's called a day job or a night job to support their uh, whatever area that whatever type of creativity that they're engaged with, whether it's visual, whether it's musical or anything else. There's really no reason to think of a job as being an impediment. Uh, be grateful to have a way to support our experience as an artist. Gratitude can open some doors for people. Just a practice of gratitude. Lots of people know this, not enough people know it. To do gratitude journaling, to have an appreciation for the trials and tribulations, for the obstacles, for the roadblocks. Those kinds of thinking actually changes, it transforms the experience, turns it into something different.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is something that in your 60 plus years of living, almost 70 of living, that you have not done in the art world that you wish you had done? I know you mentioned music, and I know you've done definitely sculptures, you've done the geometric artwork, you've done a number of other styles of art. But what is something that if you could turn back the times of the clock and everything and go back and do that you would do that you haven't done?
Well, there's only one thing that I found myself wanting to do as a young man, and that was to go to Europe and study with and work for Henry Moore. Now, that wasn't necessary for me to do, but I simply had a strong identification with organic abstractions. And I found Henry Moore, Barbara Hepworth, John Hans Arp, and a number of others uh, being sources of inspiration for me. There was a time, I think it was back in 2004, I went with Anna Maria to Asheville, and Stephen Simon was giving a workshop. Stephen Simon directed the film that Christopher Reeve starred in, titled Somewhere in Time, and then he directed this other amazing film that Cuba, what's his name?
Cuba Gooding Jr. or Cuba Gooding Sr.?
Cuba Gooding Jr., Robin Williams. They starred in this other film that the name is eluding me right now. But anyway, Stephen Simon directed that film. I think that was the last film that he directed. Anyway, then he went on to do something called Spiritual Cinema Circle. So while he was doing Spiritual Cinema Circle, I go to with Anna Maria to Asheville, and he sees me and he hears me speak, and I'm at this workshop that he's conducting, and he asked me to come to Portland, Oregon, to try out for a part in a movie. And I said, okay, I'll come. He wanted me to be in the part. He wanted the part to be mine so bad that he gave me 2 auditions. I failed miserably twice. Now, people don't know this, but at the time, my cousin Myrna Lee was married to Morgan. And so Myrna and family said, well, we can get you some coaching. I didn't have time for it. I was busy caring for my mother. I did not have a desire to be in theater. I did not have a desire to be in films. I was simply going to do it because in my mind, it was going to be a way to some money to support my habit as an artist. So it wasn't like, oh, I want to be an actor on stage. No, it was simply, oh, let me go try this. Maybe I can get the part. Maybe that can be a segue into some money. I was always looking for a way to support my life as an artist, a visual artist, only as a visual artist. I love music. I would love to have been a musician. I'm glad that I wasn't. Too many pitfalls. Look at all the amazing musicians. I have a dear friend, Carlos Morales, who's now deceased. He played with a number of groups that you might know about. I can't even think of the names of them now. Chocolate Funk, a number of other groups. Then he went on to perform with Julian Lennon. He claims that Julian Lennon got his platinum album because of him. True or false, I don't know. But anyway, the problem of becoming addicted to mind-altering substances as a musician is perhaps more problematic than it is for a visual artist, because a lot of
Mhm.
visual artists are working. It's a solo flight, But in music, you're generally hanging out, performing with others, and there's almost always some type of what we conveniently call substance abuse going on. So I am very happy and relieved that I did not become a professional musician. For that very reason, the seduction would have been there. And as we both know, these seductions are not always easy to walk away from.
Yeah, that's very true. What are some of the things about being an artist that are the negative aspects of being an artist? I know you love being an artist, you love all the works that you do and everything, but what do you consider a negative aspect of being an artist?
Well, simply not being financed, not being understood in one's time. So not being financed, not being understood in one's time, it's the same thing. The money isn't there for the support. So, you know, I have to make do with whatever funds come my way or whatever funds I can generate. And right now I have the great benefit of having a wife that has a full-time job. I'm retired. I'm living on a small amount of money on a monthly basis. The money that I make as an artist hasn't been enough. That may change any moment. I'm looking for it to change. I'm working for it to change, and I'm ready for it to change. And so, the pitfalls have to do with not having enough money to finance doing what one loves to do. And in my case, I love to create these things that we call artwork. And once again, it always circles back to what benefit to others is the work. So this reminds me of Hilma af Klint. Hilma af Klint, now who's come to the recognition of people around the planet. She and I both have a lot in common, and that is that we were born ahead of our time. Now I have to change my conversation and say I'm right on time, and people who are looking for me are about to find me, and we're about to have something wonderful happen as a result of me living long enough to have come into my own, so to speak. And one of my mentors who is deceased, he was my first surrogate father, Calvin Harris, originally from Winston-Salem. He used to always say, live long enough and have your health so that when you come into your own, when your art is finally recognized for as being valuable or being relevant, you can benefit from it. So, I'm hanging out for that. Yeah.
Definitely sounds like you're doing great in that sense and everything. Speaking of art and hanging out into the art world and everything, I know one of the conversations I've had with a number of folks, and even had one a couple of times with my dad about this, and I'm sure that you've had this philosophy as well, is that too often I think that society in general doesn't want to give art their just dues. And we're talking about that even in terms of like the money and everything. And oftentimes they'll want even businesses that can't afford the art to have the artists display their work for little to nothing. And I was just wondering your thoughts about how you even cope with that, because it is an art business, and just like it's show business. And a lot of times I find that a number of our folks that are in the arts don't pay enough attention to the business side. That's one of the things I can say honestly about both you and my dad, is that y'all are masters at the business side. But a number of folks that are even in your same age ranges don't necessarily do that. And we won't even talk about the younger folks. But I was just wondering your thoughts about those folks that are oftentimes trying to exploit the artist.
Well, there are takers and there are givers. That's what I call them. I delineate between the takers and the givers. The givers are people who have big hearts, who are here to serve. The takers are maybe they don't have a heart at all. They're busy looking for somebody that they can rob or take advantage of. I try not to think about them. I don't give them any power by thinking about them. I leave them where I find them, and that's good. Um, these challenges that we live in regards to a lack of appreciation and respect for creatives in general,
Mhm.
has a lot to do with what I call distortions in consciousness. So we're living a lot of mass distortions where our priorities are such that we don't realize that to serve is the ideal way to walk in the world. To be of service to others is the ideal way to walk in the world. If more of us realize that that's where the beauty is, in service to others, we would see a completely different structure, a completely different social structure. So your reference to what I call the takers, those individuals are like vampires in essence. They're looking to feed on someone else. And once again, our job is to starve them and to not give them any attention, to not think about them, to not support them in their efforts to take from others or to feed on others. If we were to reacquaint ourselves with having a love affair with living, a love affair with living, loving giving, when we focus on that, that's part of the transformative vision that I was talking about earlier. The more of us that do that, the more people will be inspired to do it, the more people will be inclined to do it. We're talking about a thought form that has a power to reach through walls and across any imaginary border, because our thoughts are things, they're acts of creation. So when we think about giving and sharing and illuminating others' paths, that is an act that actually reaches out beyond our skin encapsulated egos and touches others. So each one of us are broadcasting a signal. Whatever signal that we're broadcasting is being picked up because everything is happening simultaneously. All thoughts and feelings are happening simultaneously. So the more we think loving thoughts and acts of caring and acts of supporting and lifting others up, the more that takes hold in the world, and the more people will find themselves inspired to do the same. That's really what the call to action today is, to realize that our thoughts are acts of creation and that we can inspire others just by thinking inspired thoughts, thinking of sharing, having a desire to share. Those 7 statements that I spoke earlier: we apologize, please forgive us, we love you, we appreciate you, we respect you, we thank you. Now, those are statements that have to do with healing. Those are statements that have to do with going across the timeline, addressing what we conveniently call wrong. That's a curious term that may not be a just term to use, but we use it anyway. We use, left and right. We use right and wrong. We use good and evil. All of those polarity, consciousness thoughts, they're real and they're relevant, but we can find our way to a middle ground where we realize that the way to walk in the world is to not necessarily be for or against, but to simply know that we can serve to raise consciousness, to bring more beauty in the world. And we can do it without pushing agendas or beating people over the heads with ideas about what is right and what's wrong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you were saying that, I was thinking about the kind of pull and push relationship that sometimes art and art administrators have, particularly in our community and all of that. And sometimes I think that it's a pull and push that doesn't need to necessarily exist as much as it does exist. And that sometimes on both sides, it needs to be working together and less working apart. Because sometimes I think that sometimes the art administrators have their pet artists, and sometimes I think that the artists have their pet art organizations. But I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I have suffered the conditions that you're speaking of, where groups, individuals in groups, they have ideologies that they walk with. They have concepts about what's desirable and what's undesirable. And so what we have here is a situation where at any particular time on the timeline, certain art forms, certain ways of thinking about the creative response are going to be supported or not supported. So I have found less support as I have walked forward in time. And I have to be okay with that. And simply because I know that the people who are power brokers have ideologies that they're working with. They have concepts that they're working with. Those ideologies and concepts are not necessarily in alignment with the ideologies and concepts that I walk with. So my aesthetic sensibilities won't necessarily speak to them. The aesthetic sensibilities that other individuals are walking with that do speak to them, I have to accept that because there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. And the best that I can do is to keep forging ahead, keep believing in the process of delivering something of value to someone, somewhere on the timeline, and attempting to support that process of creativity, regardless of how little financing I find in the public arena. And I really have found very little financing to date, which is, once again, it's okay, because it isn't my place to judge that. I can acknowledge it what it is, and perceive it as I perceive it. I could be wrong in terms of my perception. There's such a thing as timing. And so if everything is in divine timing, then the divine timing where whatever I have created or whatever I am creating will be seen and experienced as relevant. If it comes down the road while I'm here or after I'm gone, that has to be okay with me, you see? So this idea of municipalities saying yay or nay to someone's aesthetic, it is what it is. There's no way around it, because once again, we're talking about reality being concept driven, and individuals who have certain thoughts, who are in power, in places of power, they make the calls. Artists have to say, oh, great, or that's terrible. In my heart of hearts, I can say that's terrible again and again and again, because I didn't get the commission. But I have to say that's okay.
Good.
I make peace with that and keep walking. And that's what I do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was getting ready to wrap up and everything, but I did want to bring up a couple of the other pieces that you sent me and everything. And one of them was a homage to the new physicist. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, as well as we get ready to wrap up in the next 15 or 20 minutes and everything. But definitely, I'd love to hear you talk about a homage to the new physicist.
All right. Well, that particular piece, and let's go ahead and get to that. So that's like a top front view, and it's made out of cast iron and Corten steel. So that round looking section that you see on the top is actually represents a spherical form. So if we can go forward now and look at one of the side views, the first three images were of the top view. So that's a top side view of it. So that section that points to the right, that actually represents the head of like a horse head or an animal's head. And what's on the back of this creature, this imaginary creature, is this spherical form. And I just wrote something about that last night. And once again, it's made out of Corten steel. And the piece that's on the back of this upright figure is actually cast iron. And it's made from 3 intersecting great circles. And those 3 intersecting great circles give you the corners of an octahedron. So inside this spherical form, you could actually place a perfect octahedron. But it represents a spherical form simply because it's made out of 3 great circles that are at right angles to one another. So there's a full view of it. So it stands something close to 6.5 feet tall, maybe. And once again, it's made out of Corten steel. So that's a side view of it, where you see the body is just represents a physical body of an imaginary creature, an animal perhaps. And then what's on the animal's back is this form that is actually representative of a scientific instrument, something that a physicist might use to conduct some type of scientific experiment where they're dealing with spatial frequencies or the relationships between elements and what have you. So it's really somewhat of a fantastical composition, and it came together as an experiment. I had some leftover Corten steel from a previous project, and we simply welded this steel together to make this somewhat of a fantastical imaginary creature, and with this piece on the back. So the idea of the new physicists paying homage to the new physicists, those who are trailblazers and who are actually showing us new and different understandings of dynamic relations. And I just brought up the term torsion physics to someone. I won't talk too much about torsion physics on this interview, but I'll simply say that torsion physics is really where it's at. Just like the electric universe theory, where we have plasma that has to do with everything. We talk about one of my friends whose last name is Lee, Mark. His name is Clinton Lee. We were talking on the phone just a few nights ago. Clinton is a retired professor from A&T State University. So we were talking about plasma, and he was talking about how, we have plasma that's emanating from our bodies. We can't see it with our physical eyes because our eyes aren't tuned to those frequencies. But the whole universe is electric. And to talk about that, I was just talking with someone else a few days ago about something called body electronics. So in body electronics, a group of individuals get together and hold different pressure points on a person's body. So you have one person laying on a table, and then you have 6 or 8 people standing around them. And each person is touching a different point on the person's body, either like holding points on their forehead or on their ears or on their shoulder or on their wrist, their hands, their fingers, their feet, their knees, elbows. You can actually hold all of those points. And if enough people are holding these energy points of another person, and if their energy is high enough, in other words, if they have enough electricity flowing in their bodies, the natural electricity, from having their bodies properly mineralized, and all of the energy channels that we know about in Chinese medicine, talked about in terms of meridians, if those meridians are open and that energy is flowing, a high electrical conductivity is taking place. When you lend that much electricity to one individual laying on a table, some people have actually experienced miraculous healings. Some people have actually experienced psychological and emotional healing. Some people have actually experienced physiological healing. And a lot of this is documented. The people who were doing that, I actually got involved with body electronics back in 1984, and had hoped that some friends that I happened upon, some African-American friends that I happened upon in the early 2000s, were going to join me with this enthusiasm for doing body electronics so that we could lend each other our energy, and different people could have the experience of being shored up electrically and actually having something happen that would be noticeable to the benefit of the person being fed all of this electricity. But it didn't happen. So, but that, anyway, that's all of this talk about physics. There's some amazing physics that most people don't know anything about. One of them is torsion physics. Right. And so I don't want to say too much. I actually happen to be an experimenter with torsion physics, but I can't talk about that on this show because I can only say this form right behind me. Let me see, over here. Yeah,
Right.
that form right here. This form sometimes will turn in the room, even if the heat's off. And I really, even no air current in the room, no air flowing. I have several forms in the house that will actually spin on their axis, rotate on the axis when there's no heat on, nothing moves in the room, and they start turning. Now it does turn when the heat comes on and the air starts blowing. It does turn.
Right.
Sometimes it will turn even if the heat isn't on. When it turns when the heat is not on, I said I wasn't going to talk about this. That means something else is happening.
Oh.
And I'm not going to comment on that. I'll just say something else is happening, and that's where
something mystical is happening. We'll just leave it at that. Something mystical is happening.
And on that note, there's a person that I used to work for in Winston-Salem who is no longer there in Winston. She bought a work of art of mine from the Delta Fine Arts Center in 2009, and she told me that when she saw the piece of artwork on the wall, she had this really transformative experience. She would never tell me what it was, but it was something that was so powerful that she chose to buy the piece of artwork just as a reminder of this mystical or magical experience that she had. So I've had that to happen over and over and over again. So it's just a confirmation that I'm doing something right. And that's all I need is just a little bit of evidence that I'm doing my job so that I will be inspired to continue to do it.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job, and definitely a lot of folks are definitely inspired by the amazing things that you are doing on a regular basis, and you're still doing, because I know that you also had a piece that involved even some work that you were doing while being on the beach and everything earlier this year. So I was going to bring that up as well, because like I said, the work does not stop just because we got into 2020, but it looks like you were on the beach of Wrightsville, and we're still doing some work and everything. So definitely that looks like one of your pieces that you managed to do in the sand.
In the sand, yes. Anna Maria and I draw mandalas. That's done with a compass, a homemade compass. So you have a string or wire or a rope, and then you have these two parts that one sticks in the ground, holds the center, and then you draw the circle. So that's all carved into the sand with a basically with a stick on a string. and that's I don't know how many circles that is, but we've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now, and we love doing it. And that's an aerial view taken from a hotel room. Somebody actually came down on the beach while we were doing that and said, "Hey, I took this photograph. Do you want it?" And they transferred it to us. So that's one of the rare moments when someone took an aerial view, or more aerial view. But most of the time, we take a view of it just from standing a number of feet away from it. We've done some that were like 30 some circles. I think the biggest one that we did might have been 34 circles. We've done 6 circle mandalas, 19 circle mandalas, and like I said, maybe up to 30 some circles. And they're all unique. And one of the things that we enjoy experiencing, even if it is a fiction in our minds, sometimes we see dolphins that show up along the edge of the water, and we suggest to ourselves they're coming to cheer us on. So that could be fact or fiction. We don't know. I will say this much for those forms, that it is said that a 2-dimensional pattern actually has a corresponding 3-dimensional energetic field that it creates. So these mandalas that are in the 2nd dimension are actually said to actually have a 3-dimensional corresponding energetic field that is generated. So whether that's fact or fiction, I can't say, but that would actually perhaps fall under the subject of quantum physics also.
That would definitely fall within that idea and everything. I was actually going to bring up a greater view, because that's actually, I guess, a closer up view of that same picture and everything. And it says, we need yes, love, and some of the words that are said on there as well. So all we need is yes, love. And I believe that was the words from a rock song, if I remember correctly.
All we need is love. That was John Lennon. Those were the words that he spoke in a song. And that one says, love is all we need. Yes. And so those words are around the circle. I might have had 6 circles. Let me see. Love is all we need. Yes. And so it's six words around the circle, starting over on the left-hand side, love. And then the next word is all we need. And then you see the word yes. And that's it. Just 6 words. I work with 6-word phrases, and that's a whole nother story, where I work with 6-word phrases on something that are called kaleidocycles and hexaflexagons. Kaleidocycles are actually 2-dimensional puzzles where you actually have 3 or more solutions when you fold the form. And then the kaleidocycle has, I think, maybe 4 different solutions also. But they're made out, it's like 6 tetrahedrons that are connected to each other. And so I've been playing with those things for maybe since 2014, to be exact. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so playing with those. And getting a lot of great reactions from those and everything. I think you also had sent me a piece that you had done earlier in the latter part of last year, and I was going to bring that up as well, because I believe it was one that was from December of 2020. And of course, we know that we're in the middle of 2021. But as I find those to bring up and everything, what are some of the new pieces that you're working on, and what are some of the things that you need from the world of fandom, or the world of your fans and everything? Because I know definitely you need people to buy the artwork, and you definitely need probably more commissions and all of that. But what are some of the other things that you are looking forward to having in your art space?
Well, I did apply for a Guggenheim Fellowship, so I'm looking for a yes from them. Not that I expect to have one, but I would love to have that experience. That particular piece, that's the piece that the healthcare practitioner told me that she saw that on her computer screen and had a spontaneous healing in her left shoulder. That particular piece is titled A Light from Circle Island. It happens to be out in California right now. It is made up of more circles than I can even remember. But I'm trying to get back to your question. One of the things that I'm looking for is the possibility of either having an art rep or a gallery that says, we can sell this man's work, or we can place this person's work. So selling, that's a term that you have to use, but the idea of placing the work in collections. I've had a number of people who call themselves collectors who have suggested to themselves that they are interested in my work. They haven't purchased it. That's okay. It might not fit for them. That's perfect. But I am actively seeking representation. So I'm doing what I can to put the information out there in the world, so that people can see my work, so that someone that has a gallery or either an artist rep or representative can say, yes, we know who's looking for this work. And I've had a few people to come to me in 2020 and even in 2021 saying, well, my clients might be interested in your work. Nothing's happened yet, but something could happen. So I'm open, I'm ready, and just waiting for it to happen.
And hopefully that'll be coming and everything. You had also sent me, and I'm not sure what this all involves, but you'll have to tell me, and then I'll bring it up. And you said sent a video, which is actually a funkadelic song, and I was trying to figure out what that had to do with your artwork.
Well, wait a minute. Which funkadelic song was that? Was that the one about free your,
Free your mind.
free your mind? Right. Well, Mark, do you have the image that went with that? Because I'm not. I journal every day, and my way of journaling is to write something and send it out as something called a source file, right? So what's the image that goes with that particular piece?
I'm going to bring it up right now, and that's the image of the young lady, and she's got her hands waving and everything. But that's the image on the.
Oh no, that's the song, right? That's from
right.
the album cover. No, but I'm just saying, what's the was there an image?
Oh, yes, there was an image that was actually tied in to the image that we were talking about with the healing artwork.
Oh, that. Okay, super. Okay, so when I say free your mind and your rear end will follow, the kingdom of heaven is within, what that has to do with, that's a declarative statement that was used by Funkadelic back in 1971. I'm not so sure if that's the correct year. Anyway, one of my dear friends, Frank Woods, he was a Funkadelic fan, probably still is. But the reason for referencing that song has to do with what I wrote. Can you by chance read what's in the text that's in the piece? I call it source files from some particular day. Can you read that?
If I can find that. It says concerning the unhappy merry-go-round.
Yes.
Yes. Let me see. Well, I can read it out. It says concerning the unhappy merry-go-round upon which some ride, and actually I'll bring that's got it up there. The old axiom where thought goes, body must follow, wants to be read metaphorically here. Thoughts are the seed forms of what is realized, yes. If one bothers to unplug from the mass consciousness hypnotic dream spell, mainstream media feed, it becomes apparent how individuals are renting out space in their minds, thus creating desired outcomes determined by the puppet masters. In closing, an old refrain from a once popular song surfaces. Free your mind and your eyes will follow. The kingdom of heaven is within. Funkadelic's 1970.
Right. So that is one of my more pointed declarative statements that I have made. I am of the opinion that many people are renting out a tremendous amount of space in their minds, including their hearts. So the heart is not separate from the mind in my estimation. So people are being hypnotized into and seduced, in essence, into believing things that are not true, false evidence appearing real, fake news, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I was somewhere between 16 and 17, I read a book titled, give me a second. Gosh, it was really about hypnosis, but it was the term isn't coming to me right now. Manipulation of subliminal seduction. The title of the book is Subliminal Seduction. I read this book as a teenager, and of course I had been reading all of my life. So when I read Subliminal Seduction, it was a matter of having evidence that there are some very clever manipulators that are working humankind to their benefit. Okay, so we have interesting terms that have surfaced: the sheeple and the sleeple. Right. Those terms are actually quite accurate assessments of how people find themselves herded towards an abyss of unconsciousness. So that particular source file that I wrote that day was simply my protest piece, where I was saying to anybody listening, if I may, you might want to reel yourself in. You might want to consider not renting out that space in your mind. And you might want to consider listening to the still voice within. And it is my contention, if we find our way to that still voice within, there can be no deceit. One cannot be deceived. There's no trickery afoot in the forest of dreams that can fool a person who is sitting in that place of stillness and silence. So that's what that particular piece was about, freeing one's mind. In other words,
As you
not renting out any more space in one.
as you were saying that, I was thinking about the gentleman who wrote a book that I had to read in my college years and everything, who was actually a Canadian, who was a gentleman by the name of Herbert Marshall McLuhan, and he was the man that kind of came up with that whole piece of the medium is the message and wrote a number of books about that. So he was actually one who believed kind of what you're talking about. There was a lot of ways that the media manipulates the masses.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been going on for centuries. One of the things that some of us have learned in our studies of human consciousness is that the color purple was used for a reason. Okay. The nobles watercolor purple. Now, I found some scientific information about that, which stated that, the color purple back in the days was associated with royalty because it was almost impossible to get the color purple inexpensively. It was worth its weight. It was worth more than gold back in the day because of the source of the color purple. But it was associated with royalty and what have you. But we have a lot of trickery afoot, and it's been going on forever. Everybody knows that in the background something is playing, which is suggesting that we should buy more or think this or fear or whatever. Those
Right.
kinds of subliminal seductions have been going on for decades, and it has been used against humankind. And it hasn't been criminalized, which is crazy and perhaps even unfortunate. But I would say that the manipulators of the masses, I think that their days are numbered. And if I have anything to do with it, they're out of business tomorrow.
Oh, good.
Or,
So definitely they
or,
definitely need to be out of business tomorrow. I agree. I think we saw one of the master manipulators leave office several weeks ago, and hopefully he will not be trying to come back in another 4 years and everything, because he was definitely doing a lot of that manipulation. But like you said, he wasn't the only one. I remember even Reagan doing some, and a number of other folks through the sands of time just in my years of existence.
if you only knew some of the backstories. We can't talk about any of that stuff, but some of the backstories of this manipulation, it's really astonishing. And because of my studies, I've actually looked at historical data that takes us way back on the timeline in terms of the manipulation of masses by a select few individuals who were power brokers in their day. And we have those individuals that are alive, and if I may use the word, ill today. I won't say well, they're alive and ill because that's an illness that they suffer. If I may be playful. Yeah, so right. Lots of
No, they're definitely alive and ill today. That's actually one of the things that this whole network, the international broadcast media, talked about, because both Nick and Kim talked about the fact that they went to in front of news media and in front of some of the bigger networks, kind of wanted to bring this idea of democratizing media and bringing folks to share their stories, kind of what I'm doing with this show and a couple of the other ones that I do on this platform, and what Sasha does with his chess show and his investment show and a number of other kind of shows that exist here. But they were basically told, as Kim likes to put it, that it didn't lead unless it bled or something like that. And that was kind of like with the philosophy of a lot of the people in the power broken situation. So if it didn't have blood and other kind of negative aspects, they didn't want any aspect of it, and they were trying to create positive programming.
Well, the puppet masters that have them on strings, that's their dictum.
Right.
You have to have suffering and blood and gore, et cetera, sex sales, et cetera. That has to be part of what's being fed to the masses, because as long as the masses can remain seduced into what I call fear, corralled into fear, they experience not knowing. One's true self and one's divine self is not going to be engaged until fear is subjugated, reduced, eliminated from the equation. Lots of people are walking in fear. Lots of people are being conditioned to walk in fear for the simple purpose of feeding a select group of vampires that are at the top of the food chain. And there's nothing more that can be said about that. Uh,
Yeah, because the other thing that I'm just curious of your thoughts about this, but Zach, my funk musician friend, talked about this as do a couple of other friends. But it also seems that not just those walking in fear, but we also have a lot of folks that are kind of like walking around almost in a zombie-like status and everything. So they're not quite uh, in fruition with themselves. I'll put it that way. So definitely not just the controllers, but sometimes these folks that are being way overly controlled and therefore are not even their selves. That's my thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours.
I'm happy to be able to say that if I do encounter people like that, they're brief encounters. I really don't want to make any type of declarative statement on that subject, simply because we have some serious problems afoot. I'm thinking about all of the plastics and all of the plastics that and all of the effects that plastics have upon humans.
Mhm.
That's one of the side effects of modern technology. Excuse me. We have contamination of water, we have contamination of air. So much is happening. One of the things that many people were excited to see was the elimination of a lot of pollution in the air once this global lockdown took place. And so there were people actually singing praises about the global lockdown because of the elimination of so many toxins in the environment. Now, we could do better. We don't need a global lockdown to become mindful of our actions, which includes the things that we dump into the ocean as a collective, um, the trash that we throw out our windows, eh, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these simple acts that we see committed where there's unconsciousness involved, a lack of a sense of connecting the dots between an act of throwing something like trash out onto the street or on the floor for that matter. Um, Gosh, man, I could go. I was working in Winston-Salem State once, and a young lady in her car threw some trash out her window, and I said, Miss young lady, I said, you dropped something, and that was my way of saying, hey, do something about it. She rolled her eyes at me, and of course ignored me, and I said, okay, well, but we have this programming where people are programmed to disregard the actions that they're taking as being negative actions. Okay, so and this programming, which is what we're touching on, uh, it's extreme, and
Mhm.
but we could spend a whole hour talking about the programming.
Oh yeah, the program is definitely very prominent and everything out there, and definitely a lot of folks are being programmed on a regular basis, unfortunately, and all of that. But I agree with you that there's a lot of programming out there, and we've got to find ways to have folks like yourself that are doing the battle and trying to deprogram a lot of these folks that have been programmed and all of that. One of the things I was going to have was letting folks know how they can reach you and everything. So I was going to bring up the website. So there it is, vandoorninit.com. So they can definitely check out the website and definitely see a lot of the amazing work that I've been sharing and everything. So I was going to bring that up and also bring up the light weaving as well. And I've always been wondering where that term came from. So I would love to hear you talk about where you came up with the title light weaving and what that means.
Okay, well, from the ancient Yaqui sorcerers that Carlos Castaneda studied with, we have these things called strands of awareness. So in certain people, I've never done peyote and I've never done mushrooms or any of this good stuff, but people have these amazing experiences of seeing these strands of awareness, what I'll call strands of awareness, during these moments when they're having these. I'll even call them mystical experiences. Okay, so light weavings simply means that I'm taking light and weaving it into a recognizable pattern. It's as simple as that. So it's a metaphor for uh, weaving light. Okay, I mean, in other words, I don't know how to say. I'm speaking metaphorically when I say
Yeah.
light weaving. I'm weaving light, making something that you see lines, you see lines that are references to strands of awareness. And one of the things about my work, and people will see this at light weavings, if you see these lines emanating from a circle or whatever, those lines actually represent consciousness. They represent strands of awareness. And they represent light. So in the ancient iconography from the Judeo-Christianity, where you have these halos around the heads of these illuminated beings, these halos represent the auric field, the light that emanates from these beings. And so I'm actually suggesting that light is emanating from everything, and everything is a quality of consciousness. We can't necessarily see the light with our physical eyes, but the light is emanating from it anyway. And so if some of you have studied some of the, I'll call it some of the truer science that was made available to us by some of the pioneers of torsion physics and some of the pioneers of orgonite, the man's name eludes me right now, but the man who brought us orgonite from Europe, he actually found a way to photograph these little light, these tiny lights, and he had a name for it, and I'm not recalling it. And these little lights were actually, I believe, were evidence of photons that they were actually being recorded. So you have a lot of people that talk about the light from all of these mystical traditions. Close your eyes, you might see a light, you might see a star or whatever on the inner. Well, all of these ancient mystical experiences and mystical traditions are talking about very similar experiences that people are having. And so what I am attempting to do with my artwork is to remind people of these mystical experiences. And that's why I chose the word light weavings, because I'm actually, once again, weaving patterns of light that are going to be recognizable. So my work actually serves as a reminder to individuals of a mystical experience, or a matter of closing their eyes and seeing this illumination of light, or this halo of light around somebody. There's so many people who have this ability to see the aura, see people's auras, and they're written off as being lunatics or whatever. But these people simply have their pineal gland is operating properly, I should say, and most of us can only see with their physical eyes, but the third eye, the spiritual eye, is the true eye, and is the eye to rely upon, right? Yeah, the eye that you can count on, right? Yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm just trying to remind people of natural intelligence, what I call natural intelligence.
Yeah, you do a great job of that. You definitely remind them of the natural intelligence and a lot of the messages that we should be getting on a more regular basis that we don't, whether it's the sacred geometry, whether it's natural intelligence, or a number of other things that go on. I could talk to you for like 5 hours or 6 hours, but I've actually got to get ready to wrap up and everything. But I definitely would love to have you come back and do a part two at some point. But definitely, if there's any final thoughts that you want to share on this part one, because like I said, I know we could go on talking for hours on end and everything, but definitely I would love to hear any kind of final thoughts or other things that you would like to share that I haven't got to and everything. I think we've covered a number of things, but there might have been some things that you would like to have touched on that we haven't quite got gone on this one. And of course, I would love to do a part two with you, because like I said, you are a fascinated individual, and I can have conversations that could last literally 12, 14, 24 hours on a day and everything.
Well, Mark, we did touch on a few important subjects. The idea of first cause, actually recognizing that we have an inalienable right to see ourselves as first cause, so we're not victims of circumstances. And when we flip that switch in our heads and our hearts, that turns on some lights on the inside, and people see those lights when they come on. And my wife tells me all I have to do is walk in a room, and people are like, "Who is that?" Well, I don't see myself. You know what I mean? I'm not looking at myself. I'm just being. But other people are taking note, and I'm saying, okay, well, great. Now I'm not trying to be anything other than just this guy that's making an effort to enjoy his walk in the world and his service to humankind. And what other people see, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, is none of my business. But if people can just consider finding their way to their sacred center, lots of practices, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, lots of practices will actually help us to get there. Prayer, it doesn't matter. however you get to your sacred center, go there. And so that's my message, find a way to your sacred center so that you can see your inner light turn on or increase, so that people outside of you can see your light, and they can be inspired to find their way to their light, to their sacred center. That's my message.
Well, that's a great message. It's a very powerful message. And I definitely appreciate you being on. And like I said, anytime that I can do it again, I would love to have another conversation, because I think we could even do a 3 or 4 or 5 part series, because you have such a wealth of knowledge and you have such great thoughts and everything. And I'm sure that a lot of folks will be interested in what you said this time around. And definitely we'll have to have some other folks come on and even give you comments and questions that they may want to have that I did not touch on, but I definitely tried to touch on as many things as I could think of off the top of my head. And now I've got to go find me some food to eat, and I know it's late.
Mark, thank you so much. I appreciate the visit. Okay. Okay.
Appreciate you. So I'm going to end the broadcast, but that'll end it. Our conversation with Van Dorn Hennon, but it was a very powerful conversation, and I hope that folks learned about this amazing artist that has definitely called North Carolina home, and that we are proud to have as one of our premier artists here in this area. But definitely looking forward to having more conversations with him later on as well. But right now, we're going to end this broadcast, and we'll come back at you with more shows later on the International Broadcast Media. Definitely a very powerful conversation. As you can tell, I wasn't as trimmed up during the time of that conversation with Van Dorn Hennon, but still was an amazing conversation where we learned a lot. Definitely had a great and amazing conversation, and I'm definitely looking forward to having more conversations with him in the very near future. So definitely we'll continue having conversations with him, as well as other artists and entertainers and entrepreneurs, creatives, activists, and a number of folks here on Mullings Music Memories and all of that. And of course, on the other show that I do, which of course you see here on the attachment, and which you also saw on some of the backdrop on that show, radio show with Mark Lee, we also have conversations that are in a similar flow and all of that. And we do that with the online dinner party as well. By the way, this is the week of the Black Empowerment Week here in North Carolina. So don't forget that. That is definitely some very powerful conversations. Yesterday, they were talking about love. Today, they're going to be going down a walk in history, talking about some of the historical things that have happened here in North Carolina, and I imagine around the country and all of that. And of course, there's also going to be conversations during the week around entrepreneurship, around health, around a number of other things within the African American community. So should be some more great conversations that exist within that event as well. I am proud to be an engineer on that particular event, so definitely kind of a producer of the talks and all of that. So definitely looking forward to having more conversations today. Like I said, today we'll be dealing with history, and that'll be at around the 7 o'clock hour. So as a matter of fact, we may wind up cutting this show a little bit short, not a lot short, because I've got to deal with production in on that as well. But truly, we've had another amazing show with another amazing guest. As a matter of fact, we had 2 amazing guests today. We had Nancy Burroughs earlier on the radio show with Mark Lee, and she was definitely being very open and very interested in a lot of the things that she has gone through, whether that was anorexia, whether that was being a person that was abused as a child and all of that, but definitely has talked about that and is not afraid to talk about these taboo subjects and all of that. So whether it's dealing with sexual abuse, eating disorder, depression, or a number of other things, she is very open about these conversations and is definitely one to give you her idea of that story and to share it, as she puts it, openly and honestly. And I definitely appreciated having her on the show and hearing a lot of that open conversation, similar to the open conversation that we were hearing from none other than Van Dorn Hennon. As he was saying, he was sharing a lot of his thoughts, even his thoughts about mindfulness, about prayer, about a number of other things that are going on and all of that. So definitely it was great having those conversations and learning so much about these amazing individuals. And by the way, if you are an amazing individual that falls in any of these categories, it doesn't have to be necessarily just the activists, the entrepreneurs, and the creatives. That's just kind of my wheelhouse where I find a lot of my guests from. But I also love hearing from a number of other folks, including our educators, including our medical folks. Of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so anytime we can hear about what's going on in the medical community, that is always good as well. So definitely, if you are involved in just an interesting field and would like to hear more and more about what's going on and to share what's going on in your world, then we would love to hear from you right here on International Broadcast Media. So definitely keep that in mind and all of that. We are always looking for great and amazing stories to share with our audience and our crowd and all of that. By the way, just to let you know about that weather, it's not just us that has been hit by some of this crazy weather, but I just was reading right now that they're saying that an Arctic blast of cold weather is delivering punishing temperatures across the nation, with Texan cities like Dallas and Houston grinding to a halt as they encounter especially brutal conditions. Most of the central corridor of the U.S. has entered a deep freeze, triggering rolling power outages across Texas and in areas such as Nashville, Tennessee. An estimated 50 million people in 14 states are likely to see temperatures plummet below zero this week as record setting deep freeze envelopes the country, according to the Washington Post. President Joe Biden has approved a disaster proclamation for Texas as 3 million residents deal with power outages and the state grapples with frozen pipes, icy roads, and traffic deaths due to the unprecedented cold weather. So definitely that is something that folks are dealing with here in the United States, a lot of this cold weather and all of that. So definitely I know a lot of folks will be paying attention, trying to stay safe from the harsh weather if they are in an area of harsh weather and all of that. And then in the field of banking, Bank of America CEO and Citigroup's outgoing CEO both saw their pay slashed in 2020. According to Bloomberg, both banks cited the pandemic as a factor in determining their compensation, though Citibank also cited last year's consent order from the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency for failing to fix its risk management issues. In a filing, Bank of America said CEO Brian Monahan's pay was cut 7.5% to $24.5 million. Group CEO Michael Corbett's pay was slashed 21% to just over $19 million. Still seems like a lot of money for those bank presidents and all of that, but definitely they do look like they are getting some cuts in their pay. But I just wish I was getting somewhere near that kind of pay and all of that, but I'm nowhere near that whatsoever. And by the way, if you're wondering what the best business school is, with several top U.S. business schools opting out of MBA rankings this year, European universities and lesser known programs have climbed the list. INSEAD in France and IESE Business School in Spain topped the most recent economists and Financial Times rankings, respectively. As Harvard Business School, the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton Business School, and other elite programs sat out. Several institutions said the pandemic encumbered efforts to gather the data required to be ranked, allowing other programs to step into the spotlight and secure bragging rights amid an uptick in business school applications. So it does look like a lot of folks apparently are trying to go into business school and all of that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after things slow down with the pandemic and how things go and all of that. I've heard some folks of mine, including some friends, talking about this app called Clubhouse, asking if I was on it, and I'm not yet. Maybe I need to be on it, but I don't know that it fits with my particular phone that I have right now. But it says that explosive growth in drop-in audio chat app Clubhouse has propelled big tech toward the next frontier for social media. Old fashioned voice audio. Hey, this could be a whole nother career for me and everything. So maybe I need to find out more about Clubhouse since folks are always praising my voice and all of that. So maybe we'll have to check into at least the voice audio aspect of what Clubhouse is all about. The 11-month-old social media platform notched nearly 4 million downloads last month, according to Apptopia, with its vital growth making it the first American social media company to break out in years, per the New York Times. Facebook and Twitter are already working on similar products to compete with Clubhouse, helping to fuel an audio boom that has created new opportunities for content creators and new challenges for content moderation. So, like I said, I might have to find a way to get some of this audio onto Clubhouse and all of that. So that could be an interesting thought, and I might have to figure out a way to get involved in that particular field of audio and all of that. So definitely, because apparently it's an exclusive invitation only social networking app that is a hybrid of the conference calls, talkback radio, and house parties. So I know some folks that are on that, including I want to say that maybe even Raquel and I don't know if Nancy's on that or some of the other folks, but it does seem to me that I've heard some folks that are in my friend circle that have definitely talked about the fact that they are part of that and they're definitely finding it to be very wonderful and all of that. So, according to an article in The Guardian, it says, what is the Clubhouse app and why is it suddenly everywhere? Part talkback radio, part conference call, part house party. Clubhouse is a social networking app based on audio chat. Users can listen into conversations, interviews, and discussions between interesting people on various topics. It's just like tuning into a podcast, but live and with an added layer of exclusivity. Clubhouse is invite only. As a matter of fact, I understand there are even some celebrities that are on Clubhouse as well. You can't just download it off the App Store and create an account, much like in a real life country or yacht club. You have to be invited to join by an existing member. Real world elitism, but make it virtual. When you join, you select topics of interest like tech, books, business, or health. The more information you give the app about your interests, the more conversation rooms and individuals the app will recommend you follow or join. The conversation room is just like a conference call, but with some people on the call talking and most listening in. And just like a phone call, once the conversation is over, the room is closed. Unlike Twitch, where live stream videos stay on the platform for people to return to and watch, the live audio chats had in conversation rooms disappear. However, this doesn't stop users from recording the live conversations. A YouTube user, for instance, live streamed a conversation room launched by Elon Musk. So, how do you get a Clubhouse invite? To join an existing Clubhouse user has to send an invite from their app, giving you access to set up an account. If you're invited, you'll see a link texted to your phone number directing you to a sign up page in the app. Clubhouse users can't just send an invite to anyone who wants to join. However, existing users only have two invites available at first. In a recent blog post, the creators had announced that their 2021 goal is to complete the app's beta stage so they can eventually open up Clubhouse to the whole world. And some people may be asking, what does Elon Musk got to do with this? Clubhouse has been around since March 2020 when it was launched by Silicon Valley entrepreneurs Paul Davidson and Rohan Seth. In May 2020, it had just 1,500 users and was worth $100 million. But this week, it burst into the mainstream. Or actually, I guess this was maybe a while back and everything, or at least maybe fairly recently, because it did say as of February 1st. So let me find out when this particular article was written and all of that. And I am giving y'all some information about and all of that, so I can be sure that I am giving you the right time frame when I say but this week. But actually, if you just go in, you'll find the article on The Guardian and all of that. But it did say that it burst into the mainstream when Elon Musk hosted an audio chat on Clubhouse with Robinhood CEO Vlad Tenev. The event maxed out the app conversation room limits and was live streamed to YouTube. It helped propel Clubhouse to the top of the startup charts and sparked a scramble for invitations. As of February 1st, 2021, Clubhouse has 2 million users. Clubhouse has announced forthcoming new features like tipping, tickets, or subscriptions to directly pay creators on the app. Having raised new funding since its launch, Clubhouse is now valued at looks like about $1 billion dollars and is considering a unicorn startup like Airbnb, Uber, and SpaceX. Reuters reports the demand for membership is now so hot that a market for them has grown on platforms like Reddit, eBay, and Craigslist. In China, invitations are being sold on Alibaba's second-hand marketplace, Idle Fish. Musk summed up the appeal of Clubhouse during his chat with Kenneth, noting that the context switching is the mind killer. The idea is that when users are logged into Clubhouse with notifications disabled, they can focus on one topic at a time. And some people are also wondering why it was so popular in China. The app's value extends beyond exclusivity, while censorship, suppression, and government control apparently is rife in China. Clubhouse managed to fly under the radar of China's firewall for several months unlike other social media networks, Instagram and Facebook. It became very popular in recent weeks, attracting large numbers of Chinese users and giving them a rare chance to binge free expression and exchange discussion on topics that are usually blocked on the mainland, including Beijing, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Courts reported that Chinese users, largely tech investors and professionals, are using the space to talk about topics that would otherwise be censored back home, such as democracy. E-commerce sites in China were offering hopeful users of Clubhouse the chance to buy invites on platforms like Zenio and Taobao. Inviting codes were being sold for between 150 to 400 yuan or yuan, which is between $23 to $61. As of Monday, February 8th, so that was last Monday, Clubhouse has been blocked inside China. So they did block it recently and all of that. So definitely it does look like Clubhouse is very popular. And I've been saying that I was going to try to get a Clubhouse account at some time or another. I'm already on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on a number of the other platforms as well, but I have not actually got on Clubhouse. So if anybody wants to send me a Clubhouse invite, they will get no argument from me whatsoever. So if y'all are interested and want to provide me with a Clubhouse invite, just know that I will gladly accept it and all of that. So definitely it is something that seems to be very much popular and all of that. By the way, you're sitting at home, and some people are wondering about stopping the guilt of pandemic laziness. And so one article was saying you're sitting at home scrolling through Netflix recommendations when you suddenly are hit with a pang of guilt for being lazy. Been there. Same. One social psychologist tells us to stop this nonsense, explaining we feel this way because we use external cues as an anchor to help us gauge whether we are spending our time well enough. Not every moment we're home needs to be spent working. In fact, they encourage cyberloafing or a mindless scroll through the internet or social feeds, as research shows. We often come back more productive and focused after such an activity. So definitely looks like some folks are saying that maybe we don't need to be having these guilty pains and all of that. So definitely keep that in mind and all of that, if that's something that you may not be needing to feel guilty about. And speaking of Elon Musk, as I did earlier, it does seem that he's in the news for another reason as well. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez says he has held talks with Elon Musk about the construction of a new tunnel exclusively for electric vehicles in the city's downtown area. The Miami Herald reports Musk has set an ambitious price tag and time frame on the project, stating that he believes the tunnel, which would connect Brickell Avenue and Biscayne Boulevard, could be built for just $30 million in the space of 6 months. Because the tunnel would solely be for electric vehicles, a major point of construction cost saving would be the tunnel's lack of ventilation. So definitely looks like they may be trying to do a tunnel similar to the subways in New York there in Miami as well. So definitely just keep that in mind as you think about things that you might want to invest in. Who knows? Maybe that's an investment that folks may be thinking about later on. And last but not least, in some news that I'm going to give y'all and everything before getting ready to wrap up and head on over to my other event and all of that, Amazon is suing New York Attorney General Letitia James to head off potential legal actions by the state on how the tech giant has handled worker safety during the pandemic. The New York Times reports that Amazon wants to prevent James from charging the company over safety concerns at 2 New York City warehouses. The complaint says James threatened to sue if Amazon didn't meet demands on safety protocol, as well as reinstating Christian Smalls, an Amazon worker fired after saying the company wasn't doing enough to protect employees. Amazon is defending its safety measures and accuses James of overstepping her authority. So definitely that's a little bit of the news of the world and all of that. I'm going to bring you up a couple of the shows that we have that exist right here on our platform and all of that. So definitely that is how we're going to wrap up Mullings Music and Memories. And who knows, I might even find at least one music track, since you know it is called Mullings Music and Memories, and we haven't had any music whatsoever on this particular edition. So I may bring up at least one track of music to get us out of here as well. But it'll probably be a short track and all of that. But I did want you to check out some of the great shows that exist, including one of my favorites, Talking Upstream. And of course, Financial Fridays. And you can't go wrong with Gamers Den. And we'll close it out with the music of Nelly Tiger Travis and a song that's got a funny title entitled Slap Your Weave Off.
This is the canoe that a young couple will get gloriously lost in together.
I heard the talk that's been going around. You after my man, and it's all over town. You asked for his number from a couple of his friends. Now what's up with that girl? You know he's my man. I ain't with that disrespect. Girl, you know you're wrong. Why you trying to be smart? I don't know what you want. You better find yourself something better to do. Cause it ain't gonna be nothing nice when I catch up with you. I'm gonna slap your weave off. I'm gonna slap your weave off. I'm gonna slap your weave off.
Hey folks.
If you don't leave my man alone.
Doing good.
I'm gonna slap your weave off. I'm gonna slap your
I'm wrapping up something that'll be done in a minute, and then I'll be right here with y'all. Give me about 2 seconds.
You've been hanging around where he play ball.
I did not. I've been doing other work, but I can grab it real fast. I can grab it real fast. And we can
You
put it
better
up.
push on, cause me and my boo is tight. You ain't got nothing coming, girl, and I know that's right. You gonna make me turn ghetto if you keep on being persistent. My mama didn't raise no punk. Oh no, so let's not get it twisted. I'm gonna slap your weave off. I'm gonna slap your weave off. I'm gonna slap your weave off. If you don't leave my man alone, I'm gonna slap your weave off. Oh yeah. I'm gonna slap your weave off. I'm gonna slap your weave off. If you don't leave my man alone, you better stay out of his face. Oh girl, you're gonna make me get the game. I'm gonna slap your weave off. Oh yeah, slap your weave. Oh, I'm gonna slap your weave. Oh, slap your weave. Oh, slap your weave. Oh yeah, I'm gonna slap your weave. I'm gonna slap it off, baby. I'm gonna slap your weave. You're gonna be looking all bald-headed and everything. Yeah. I'm gonna slap your weave. I'm gonna slap it off, pull it off. Whatever I gotta do, baby. If you don't leave my man alone, I'm gonna take you home. I'm gonna take it all, baby. You're gonna walk around, oh, with the hair ain't on the ground. I'm gonna slap it
By the way, this particular show is ending right now, and if you're interested, the Coco Miller show is a show that airs on Thursdays. So definitely keep that in mind as something that is going on the Facebook. So we definitely support a lot of other shows around as well. So that's going to wrap up another edition of Mullins Music and Memories. But I'm going to go on over and check out Black Empowerment Week, where they've got an amazing week going on and just some amazing things that are happening on a regular basis. So I'm going to end this and get ready to head on over there where I'm engineering that. But they've got some great guests and some great conversations. Today's going to be dealing with history. They've also dealt with health, love, definitely entrepreneurship, and a number of other things. So check out Black Empowerment Week on the Facebook, of course, on IBM TV, and on a number of other locations as well. So it's a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to being involved all the way till Sunday. So right now, get ready to bounce on off and head on over there. But y'all have a great evening and a great week and all of that. So hopefully this rain is going to get on out of here and we'll be in a much better space. But that's going to end this, and I'm heading on over there.